Dim the lights. Whispered secrets echo through palace halls. Forbidden loves of kings, hidden marriages, forged seals, and illegitimate heirs raised in the shadows. A single whisper could alter the fate of an empire. Now, listen closely. Come, picture this. A king so desperate for a male heir that he breaks with Rome itself, creating the Church of England just to divorce his first wife. In 1533, Henry VIII secretly married Anne Boleyn while still wed to Catherine of Aragon, making their daughter Elizabeth technically illegitimate in the eyes of Catholic Europe. Court whispers spoke of midnight ceremonies in hidden chapels, forged documents bearing false seals, and Archbishop Cranmer's nervous hands as he performed the clandestine wedding ceremony that would reshape Christianity. The soft rustle of silk gowns against stone floors, the gentle scratch of quills on royal decrees, the quiet terror of courtiers who knew too much yet dared not speak. Anne's fall came swift. Accusations of adultery, treason, and the crime of producing only daughters led to her execution within 3 years. Yet, from this ultimate betrayal of marriage vows and religious tradition, emerged Elizabeth I, one of England's greatest monarchs, proving that illegitimate birth could not dim the light of true greatness. How many other illegitimate heirs changed the course of history through their very existence? Hey friends, dim the lights and imagine Versailles before its golden glory, when young Louis XIV first learned the art of royal deception and the delicate balance of public grandeur and private passion. In 1661, the 23-year-old Sun King began his first serious affair with Louise de la Vallière, a modest maid of honor whose gentle nature captured his heart and bore him 4 children in secret chambers. Court protocol demanded absolute discretion. Louise would slip through hidden passages carved into palace walls to reach the king's chambers, while experienced courtiers pretended not to notice her growing belly or the telltale glow of pregnancy. The gentle swish of secret doors opening on silent hinges, the muffled footsteps on cold marble floors at midnight, the soft whispers of servants sworn to silence upon pain of exile. Their children were acknowledged but never fully legitimized, living in the shadow between royalty and obscurity, receiving titles but never the full rights of legitimate heirs. Louise eventually retreated to a Carmelite convent, trading silk for rough wool, but not before establishing the template for royal mistresses that would define French court culture for centuries. The king's heart, it seemed, had many chambers, each locked with golden keys. What price did these shadow mothers pay for their brief moments in the sun? You're walking through the snow-covered courtyards of the Winter Palace now, where the greatest scandal of the Russian Empire unfolded behind walls of ice and intrigue, hidden from prying eyes by the vast expanse of imperial protocol. Catherine II, the German-born empress who conquered hearts and territories alike, may have secretly married her lover and advisor, Grigory Potemkin, in 1774, making their relationship both political alliance and passionate romance that defied every convention of royal marriage. Whispers spoke of a midnight Orthodox ceremony performed by a priest sworn to secrecy, witnesses bound by sacred oaths, and a marriage certificate hidden in Potemkin's personal papers like a treasure too dangerous to display. The soft crackle of fires in ornate porcelain stoves, the gentle clink of tea glasses rimmed with gold, the muffled conversations in French and Russian that no one dared record in official court chronicles. Their correspondence reveals pet names and intimate jokes shared between equals, a rarity in royal relationships where power usually meant loneliness. Though never officially acknowledged by the court, this union shaped Russian expansion southward and gave Catherine her greatest political partner in conquest. Some secrets, it seems, were too powerful for even empresses to speak aloud to the world. How many empires were built on love letters no one was meant to read? Dear listeners, settle in as we visit Restoration London, where the theater lights dim and orange sellers call their wares through smoky air thick with pipe tobacco and the promise of entertainment after years of Puritan rule. Charles II, England's merry monarch, shocked the rigid court by elevating Nell Gwyn from humble orange seller to royal mistress, making her one of the most beloved figures of her time despite her complete lack of noble blood. Unlike other royal mistresses who desperately tried to ape aristocratic manners, Nell never pretended to nobility. She remained proudly common, charming the king with quick wit and honest laughter rather than carefully rehearsed courtly breeding. Their son, Charles Beauclerk, was openly acknowledged and received titles and rich lands, while Nell lived in royal apartments overlooking the Thames, entertaining visitors with the same earthy humor that had won a king's heart. The gentle applause of theater audiences who adored her performances, the soft rustle of orange peels scattered on cobblestones, the warm laughter echoing from palace windows late into London nights. Court ladies sneered behind painted fans, but the public adored her honesty in a world of masks. On his deathbed, Charles famously pleaded with his brother, "Let not poor Nellie starve," ensuring her comfort forever with his final royal command. What made this commoner more memorable than countless forgotten queens? You're stepping into the gaslit salons of Second Empire Paris, where champagne bubbles rise like whispered secrets and silk rustles with hidden intentions, while fortunes change hands over card tables and quiet conversations. Before becoming Emperor of France, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte survived years of exile thanks to his English mistress, Harriet Howard, who funded his political ambitions with her considerable fortune earned through previous liaisons with wealthy men. She bankrolled his dangerous coup attempts, supported him through imprisonment in the fortress of Ham, and even financed his successful 1851 seizure of power that transformed France and Europe forever. Their relationship produced no acknowledged children, but her financial support literally bought him an empire, paying for propaganda, bribing officials, and maintaining the network of supporters who made his rise possible. The soft clink of gold coins counting out destiny, the gentle scratch of bank drafts being signed in elegant handwriting, the muted conversations in hotel rooms across London, where revolution was planned over tea and promises. When he married Eugenie for political reasons and dynastic necessity, Harriet was quietly compensated with a generous settlement and disappeared from history like morning mist. Her sacrifice remained unsung, buried beneath the glitter of the Second Empire she had made possible with her gold and devotion. Hey friends, if you're enjoying these stories of power and passion, don't forget to subscribe for more whispered secrets from history. How many empires owe their existence to love that could never speak its name? You're standing in a small chapel at dawn, where morning mist clings to ancient stones and only birds witness history being made in whispered vows that will echo through generations of civil war. In 1464, King Edward IV secretly married Elizabeth Woodville, a commoner and widow whose husband had died fighting for the Lancaster cause, in a ceremony so private that even his closest advisors learned of it months later through palace gossip. This clandestine marriage enraged the powerful nobility, especially the Earl of Warwick, who had been negotiating a French royal bride that would have secured valuable European alliances and filled the royal treasury. The gentle whisper of morning prayers echoing off stone walls, the soft exchange of simple vows without fanfare or witnesses, the nervous trembling of hands joining in forbidden unity that defied every rule of royal marriage. Elizabeth's elevation brought her numerous relatives into lucrative court positions, creating deep resentment among established nobles who felt their own influence threatened by these upstart Woodvilles. Their children included the future Edward V and Richard, the mysterious princes in the Tower, whose fate remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. This secret wedding ultimately led to decades of renewed civil war, as nobles felt betrayed by their king's deception and the disruption of carefully planned political alliances. What if love could reshape the destiny of entire kingdoms with a single whispered "I do"? Dear listeners, close your eyes and imagine ancient Rome at twilight, where marble columns catch the last light and secrets hide behind every toga, while the forum buzzes with gossip that travels faster than imperial messengers. In 39 BC, the future emperor, Augustus, scandalized Roman society by marrying Livia Drusilla while she was 6 months pregnant with another man's child, her belly impossible to hide beneath even the most skillfully draped stola. Political necessity drove this shocking union. Augustus desperately needed Livia's powerful family connections to consolidate his grip on power, while she needed protection from the chaos of civil war that threatened to consume her and her unborn child. Their wedding feast proceeded while distinguished guests whispered behind wine cups about her obvious condition, creating Rome's greatest gossip sensation that overshadowed even gladiatorial games. The soft splash of wine being poured into silver goblets, the gentle murmur of shocked senators trying to maintain diplomatic silence, the rustle of expensive silk as Livia's pregnancy remained diplomatically unmentioned in official wedding accounts. Her son Tiberius, born just 3 months after the ceremony, would eventually become emperor himself, making this awkward arrangement the foundation of the Julio-Claudian dynasty that would rule Rome for nearly a century. Livia proved a masterful political partner, advising Augustus through 50 years of marriage while maintaining the fiction that their union had been perfectly conventional. How many dynasties began with whispers that became the stuff of legend? You're entering a Viennese coffeehouse where piano music drifts through cigarette smoke and the Habsburg double eagle watches from gilded walls, while the city's famous charm masks the loneliness of absolute power. Emperor Franz Joseph I maintained a devoted 30-year relationship with actress Katharina Schratt, one of history's most discreet royal affairs that provided warmth to one of Europe's most isolated monarchs. Beginning in 1886, their carefully termed friendship provided the melancholy emperor with the emotional warmth his loveless marriage to the beautiful but distant Elizabeth couldn't offer after years of tragic losses and imperial duty. Court protocol demanded absolute propriety. They met for afternoon walks through Schönbrunns manicured gardens, shared quiet dinners in private rooms, and exchanged thousands of carefully worded letters that revealed deep affection without providing ammunition for scandal. Court protocol demanded absolute propriety. They met for afternoon walks through Schönbrunns manicured gardens, shared quiet dinners in private rooms, and exchanged thousands of carefully worded letters that revealed deep affection without providing ammunition for scandal. The gentle rustle of autumn leaves in imperial gardens, the soft clink of porcelain coffee cups on marble tables, the whispered conversations that sustained an empire's lonely heart through decades of political crisis and personal tragedy. Elizabeth herself encouraged the relationship, grateful that Katharina made her husband happy while she pursued her own restless travels across Europe. No children resulted from this connection, but their extensive correspondence reveals a love story built on mutual respect, intellectual companionship, and the understanding that some bonds transcend conventional marriage. What kind of love sustains itself for decades on afternoon walks and carefully worded letters? You're walking through the dimly lit corridors of Whitehall Palace, where religious tensions crackle like logs in the fireplace, and every whispered conversation might be construed as treason by those who listen at keyholes. James II's long affair with Arabella Churchill, sister of the future Duke of Marlborough and one of the most influential women never to hold an official title, produced 4 acknowledged illegitimate children. who would shape English and European history for generations. Beginning in the 1660s, when James was still Duke of York, their relationship continued even after his controversial conversion to Catholicism and his troubled ascension to the throne of a Protestant nation. The soft scrape of leather boots on polished wooden floors, the gentle crackle of secret messages being burned in fireplace grates, the muffled sounds of children playing in royal nurseries they could never officially claim as their birthright. Their son, James Fitz-James, became Duke of Berwick and a brilliant military commander who served both French and English crowns, while their daughters married into European nobility, carrying Stuart blood across the continent. This Protestant mistress's children ironically served as bridges between Catholic James and his suspicious Protestant subjects, their mixed heritage making them valuable diplomatic assets. When the Glorious Revolution came in 1688, these family connections proved more enduring and politically useful than the crown itself, creating networks of loyalty that outlasted the dynasty. How many bridges between faiths were built by children who belonged to neither side completely? Dear listeners, let the sound of sleigh bells carry you to snowy Moscow, where church domes gleam like pearls against winter skies, and love defies the crushing weight of empire and tradition. Before his famous marriage to the servant girl who became Catherine I, Tsar Peter the Great maintained a passionate 12-year relationship with Anna Mons, a German merchant's daughter from Moscow's foreign quarter, whose beauty and Western sophistication captivated the young ruler. Their affair began in 1691 when Peter was just 19 and eager to escape the suffocating traditions of the Kremlin, drawn to the cosmopolitan world she represented with her knowledge of European customs and languages. Anna received rich gifts of furs and jewels, her own palace overlooking the Moscow River, and the unofficial title of imperial mistress, while Peter ignored mounting court pressure to marry a suitable Russian bride of Orthodox faith. The soft jingle of troika harnesses in winter air, the gentle crackle of birch logs burning in porcelain stoves, the whispered German phrases that offered escape from the heavy formality of Russian court protocol. Their relationship ended dramatically when Peter discovered her secret correspondence with a Prussian diplomat, leading to her disgrace, the confiscation of her wealth, and exile from the court that had been her world. Yet Anna had introduced Peter to Western customs, fashion, and ideas that would transform backward Russia into a European power, making her influence far greater than her personal fate suggested. What if the seeds of an empire's transformation were planted in a young lover's tender rebellion against tradition? You're standing in the ancient Tower of London as evening mist rolls off the Thames, where stones hold secrets that have puzzled historians for over 5 centuries. In 1483, 12-year-old Edward V and his younger brother Richard disappeared from their royal apartments, vanishing into history just as their uncle Richard III claimed the throne. The boys had been declared illegitimate through an act of Parliament, their parents' marriage deemed invalid due to Edward IV's alleged pre-contract with another woman. Court whispers spoke of midnight removals, loyal servants dismissed without explanation, and windows in the bloody tower that suddenly went dark. The soft echo of footsteps on ancient stones, the gentle lapping of Thames water against fortress walls, the muffled prayers of those who dared not ask questions. Richard's supporters claimed the boys lived in secret comfort, while enemies whispered of murder most foul. Nearly 2 centuries later, workmen found small skeletons buried beneath a tower staircase, but their identity remains disputed. This betrayal of royal blood, whether through murder or elaborate deception, shaped English succession law and inspired Shakespeare's darkest royal tragedy. Did the princes die, or did they live hidden lives while history mourned their supposed deaths? Dear listeners, settle into candlelight as we enter the glittering world of Versailles, where a scandal involving stolen diamonds would help topple a monarchy and send a queen to the guillotine. In 1785, Cardinal de Rohan was tricked into believing Queen Marie Antoinette wanted to secretly purchase the world's most expensive diamond necklace worth more than a warship. The elaborate con involved forged letters, midnight meetings in palace gardens, and an actress impersonating the queen in darkness. Court jewelers demanded payment. The cardinal faced bankruptcy, and Marie Antoinette found herself accused of bankrupting France for personal vanity. The gentle rustle of silk gowns in marble corridors, the soft whisper of forged correspondence being passed between trembling hands, the muffled gasps of courtiers who realized their queen's reputation hung by a thread. Though completely innocent, Marie Antoinette's name became forever linked with royal excess and financial irresponsibility. The scandal provided perfect ammunition for revolutionary propaganda, transforming a queen who actually lived quite modestly by royal standards into a symbol of aristocratic greed. This betrayal by con artists and political enemies helped seal the fate of the French monarchy. How many queens have been destroyed not by their own actions, but by the lies others told about them? You're walking through the corridors of Yildiz Palace in Istanbul, where every whisper might be recorded and every servant could be an informant in the vast surveillance network of the last powerful Ottoman Sultan, Abdul Hamid II, ruling from 1876 to 1909, created an elaborate system of spies and secret police that monitored not only his subjects but his own family members, ministers, and closest advisors. Palace protocol demanded absolute loyalty, but the Sultan's paranoia meant that even his most faithful servants lived under constant suspicion and surveillance. Brothers were set to watch brothers, wives reported on husbands, and children learned to guard their words even in family gatherings. The soft scratch of intelligence reports being written in code, the gentle click of hidden doors concealing listening posts, the muted conversations conducted in languages the Sultan's spies might not understand. This systematic betrayal of trust destroyed the traditional Ottoman system of palace loyalty and created a culture of fear that weakened the empire from within. Provincial governors, military commanders, and even princes lived knowing that a single misinterpreted comment could mean exile or death. The very network designed to protect the dynasty ultimately isolated it from reality, contributing to the empire's decline and the Sultan's eventual deposition. What happens to an empire when the ruler trusts no one, and no one dares to tell him the truth? You're reclining in a Roman villa at twilight, where wine flows like secrets, and the most powerful woman in the empire conducts affairs that would shock even jaded senators. Valeria Messalina, third wife of Emperor Claudius, transformed infidelity into an art form, conducting liaisons so brazen that they bordered on political rebellion against imperial authority. While her scholarly husband buried himself in historical research and administrative duties, Messalina held competitions of endurance with Rome's most notorious prostitutes, emerging victorious in contests that scandalized even the famously debauched Roman upper class. Palace servants whispered of midnight orgies in the imperial gardens, of senators' wives corrupted at parties that lasted until dawn, of a woman who seemed determined to test the very limits of imperial immunity. The gentle splash of wine being poured into golden cups, the soft laughter echoing from hidden alcoves, the rustle of expensive silk being carelessly discarded in garden pavilions. Her final betrayal came when she secretly married her lover Gaius Silius in a public ceremony, essentially committing treason by creating a second emperor. This act of ultimate defiance forced even the patient Claudius to act, leading to her execution and marking the end of the most scandalous chapter in imperial Roman marriage. How many empires have trembled not from external enemies but from the chaos of ungoverned passion within palace walls? Dear listeners, let snowflakes drift past palace windows as we enter the refined world of 18th century Swedish court, where Enlightenment ideals clashed with the reality of forbidden royal desires. King Gustav III maintained a passionate but carefully concealed relationship with the handsome Count Axel von Fersen, a liaison that scandalized conservative nobles and threatened the carefully constructed image of royal propriety. Court protocol required the king to produce heirs with his queen, but Gustav's heart belonged entirely to the dashing count, who would later become famous as Marie Antoinette's rumored lover. Their relationship necessitated elaborate charades, public appearances with the neglected queen, carefully staged hunting trips that provided cover for private meetings, and a complex network of loyal servants who facilitated secret correspondence. The soft crackle of letters being burned in fireplace grates, the gentle echo of footsteps in hidden passages connecting royal apartments, the muffled conversations in languages that potential eavesdroppers couldn't understand. When Fersen eventually left Sweden to pursue his famous liaison with the French queen, Gustav's heartbreak became visible to the entire court, leading to whispers about the king's true nature. This emotional betrayal by a beloved who chose another monarch's attention ultimately contributed to the melancholy that marked Gustav's final years, making him vulnerable to the conspiracy that ended his life. How many kings have ruled empires while their hearts remained captive to loves they could never publicly claim? You're entering the magnificent palace at Isfahan, where Persian carpets muffle footsteps, and the scent of rosewater cannot mask the smell of fear that permeates rooms where fathers plot against sons. Shah Abbas Rus, who transformed Persia into a major power, systematically eliminated his own male heirs to prevent succession challenges, blinding or executing sons and grandsons in a paranoid effort to maintain absolute control. This ancient Persian practice of royal fratricide reached new heights under Abbas, who trusted no one with royal blood and believed that dead relatives posed no threat to his throne. Palace ceremonies became exercises in terror, with princes learning to hide their intelligence and ambition lest they attract their father's deadly attention, while court astrologers carefully avoided predictions that might suggest succession timing. The soft whisper of silk curtains concealing executioners, the gentle splash of tears falling on marble floors, the muted prayers of princes who knew their bloodline made them targets rather than treasures. By the time of Abbas's death in 1629, the Safavid dynasty had no capable heirs remaining, leading to decades of weak rulers who couldn't maintain the empire he had built through systematic family betrayal. This ultimate act of dynastic self-destruction, a father's betrayal of his own legacy, demonstrated how paranoia could destroy a royal house more effectively than any external enemy. What kind of empire can survive when its greatest enemy sits upon its own throne? You're walking through the forbidden palace in ancient Chang'an, where incense burns before ancestral tablets and every courtier's bow might conceal a dagger aimed at the most controversial ruler in Chinese history. Wu Zetian, who rose from imperial concubine to become China's only officially recognized female emperor, navigated decades of palace intrigue through a combination of political brilliance and ruthless elimination of rivals, including members of her own family. Her ascent required betraying traditional Confucian values that placed women firmly under male authority, creating a new dynasty that bore her name rather than her husband's, and establishing herself as the son of heaven despite lacking the required masculine identity. Court rituals had to be carefully reimagined. Ceremonies honoring male ancestors were adapted to include female lineages. Traditional robes of imperial power were redesigned to accommodate a woman's form, and the very language of imperial authority was modified to reflect feminine rule. The soft rustle of silk robes sweeping across polished floors, the gentle chime of ceremonial bells announcing a female emperor's presence, the whispered debates among scholars who struggled to reconcile her obvious competence with ancient prejudices. Her reign required constant vigilance against male relatives, ambitious generals, and Confucian traditionalists who viewed her rule as a cosmic aberration requiring correction. This ultimate betrayal of gender expectations lasted 15 years and proved that effective leadership transcended the limitations that society placed on royal women's. How many capable rulers have history forgotten simply because they wore the wrong body for their crown? Dear listeners, let autumn rain patter against medieval windows as we witness how military incompetence and personal betrayal could cost a king half his inheritance and change English law forever. King John, younger brother of Richard the Lionheart, lost the vast Angevin territories in France through a combination of strategic blunders, financial greed, and his notorious betrayal of Arthur of Brittany, his own nephew and rival claimant to the throne. The young Arthur disappeared while in John's custody at Rouen Castle, and whispers spoke of the king personally murdering the boy in a drunken rage, though the truth remains hidden in medieval shadows. Court records were deliberately destroyed, loyal servants sworn to silence, and French barons who might have supported John turned away in disgust at his apparent kinslaying. The soft scrape of quills crossing out names from castle rosters, the gentle splash of sealing wax on documents that would never see daylight, the muffled conversations of barons who began questioning their allegiance to a king who killed his own blood. John's desperate attempts to recover his lost French territories bankrupted the English treasury and led directly to the baronial revolt that forced him to sign Magna Carta in 1215. This betrayal of family loyalty transformed English governance by establishing that even kings must obey the law, making John's personal failings the foundation of constitutional monarchy. How many of history's greatest legal advances began with a ruler's betrayal of the very bonds that should have made them strongest? You're standing in the candlelit chambers of the Mikhailovsky Castle, where Russia's most unstable Tsar surrounded himself with Maltese knights and medieval ceremonies while plotting against his own mother's memory and legacy. Paul I, who ruled from 1796 to 1801, spent his entire reign trying to undo everything his mother Catherine the Great had accomplished, driven by decades of resentment over her refusal to share power and his suspicions about his own legitimacy. His obsession with the Knights of Malta led him to accept the Grand Mastership of an order that required Catholic faith, creating a bizarre situation where the head of the Orthodox Church simultaneously led a Catholic military order. Court life became a theatrical performance of medieval chivalry, with Russian officers forced to learn Latin phrases, attend elaborate ceremonies honoring Maltese saints, and wear crosses that symbolized loyalty to a foreign religious authority. The soft chanting of Latin prayers in Orthodox palaces, the gentle clink of ceremonial armor being donned by bewildered Russian nobles, the whispered concerns of advisors who watched their emperor retreat further from reality into fantasies of knightly honor. Paul's betrayal of Russian Orthodox tradition and his mother's secular approach to governance alienated the military, the church, and the nobility simultaneously. His reign ended when officers he had promoted through Maltese connections turned against him in the conspiracy that cost him his life. What drives a ruler to betray everything their empire stands for in pursuit of an identity that can never truly belong to them? You're walking through the royal apartments of the Palace of Aranjuez, where Spanish kings once ruled a global empire but now must choose between crown and country in Napoleon's web of European domination. Ferdinand VII, who initially appeared to be Spain's patriotic savior against French invasion, secretly collaborated with Napoleon Bonaparte, while his own people died fighting French occupation forces during the brutal Peninsular War. After being lured to Bayonne in 1808, Ferdinand abdicated his crown to Napoleon's brother Joseph, betraying Spanish independence in exchange for comfortable exile and French protection from liberal revolutionaries who threatened absolute monarchy. While Spanish guerrillas fought and died in the mountains, their legitimate king lived in luxury at Valence, studying French literature and enjoying Napoleon's hospitality as Madrid burned and Spanish America declared independence. The soft rustle of French newspapers reporting Spanish defeats, the gentle clink of wine glasses toasting Napoleon's victories over Ferdinand's own subjects, the muffled sound of conscience being buried beneath silk cushions and foreign gold. When restored to the throne in 1814, Ferdinand repudiated the liberal constitution that Spanish patriots had written in his name, proving that his collaboration with France extended to betraying the very people who had suffered for his restoration. This ultimate royal betrayal, choosing personal comfort over national sovereignty, cost Spain its American empire and its position as a European power, making Ferdinand one of history's most destructive monarchs. How many empires have crumbled not from external conquest, but from rulers who chose their own comfort over their people's freedom? You're walking through ancient Jerusalem's palace gardens as evening light fades over stone walls, where the most famous adultery in Western civilization unfolded between a king and his general's wife. King David's affair with Bathsheba, while her husband Uriah fought in David's wars, created a scandal that echoes through millennia of religious tradition. The king arranged Uriah's death in battle to cover his betrayal, making their son Solomon both illegitimate and divinely chosen. Palace servants whispered of midnight visits, forged battle orders, and a pregnancy that threatened the kingdom's stability. The soft footsteps on cedar floors, the gentle scratch of royal seals on death warrants, the muffled prayers of those who knew too much. This betrayal became sacred literature, transforming adultery and murder into divine providence through Solomon's wisdom. How many sins become holy when wrapped in the robes of destiny and divine forgiveness? Dear listeners, settle into silk cushions as we enter the perfumed world of Malmaison, where France's most famous empress maintained affairs that broke an emperor's heart and nearly toppled an empire. Josephine de Beauharnais conducted liaisons with young officers, while Napoleon conquered Europe, her infidelities becoming Paris's worst-kept secret among the sophisticated society that adored her charm. Court protocol demanded discretion, but servants whispered of morning visits from handsome lieutenants, expensive gifts to silence tongues, and love letters burned in marble fireplaces. The gentle rustle of silk against marble stairs, the soft clink of jewelry being removed by trembling hands, the muffled sounds of imperial dignity being sacrificed for momentary pleasure. Napoleon's rage when he discovered her betrayals nearly led him to divorce proceedings that would have changed European history. Instead, their childless marriage ended only when dynastic necessity demanded a fertile empress, making Josephine's infidelities a footnote to imperial politics. What empires might have endured if love had proven stronger than the need for legitimate heirs? You're standing in Solomon's temple as incense drifts through golden halls, where the wisest king in Hebrew scripture may have fathered a dynasty with Africa's most enigmatic queen. The Queen of Sheba's visit to test Solomon's wisdom became legend, but Ethiopian tradition claims their union produced Menelik I, founder of the imperial dynasty that ruled until 1974. Palace ceremonies blended Hebrew and African traditions in ways that scandalized both kingdoms' priests and nobles. The soft chime of temple bells mixing with African drums, the gentle whisper of scrolls recording bloodlines that spanned continents, the muffled debates of advisors who questioned their king's foreign alliances. Jewish tradition remained silent about romantic connections, while Ethiopian chronicles celebrated the union that supposedly brought the Ark of the Covenant to Africa. This cross-cultural betrayal of religious purity created competing claims to Solomon's legacy that lasted 3 millennia. How many royal bloodlines stretch across continents, connecting civilizations through love stories too politically dangerous to record. Dear listeners, let snow fall softly outside imperial windows as we discover how Russia's most celebrated Tsar maintained a shadow family that rivaled his official dynasty in importance and affection. Alexander I, who defeated Napoleon and liberated Europe, conducted a 20-year affair with Maria Narishkina that produced children he loved more than his legitimate heirs. Court etiquette required absolute discretion, but the Tsar's devotion to Maria became an open secret among those who watched him visit her apartments daily for 2 decades. Palace servants arranged separate households, secret ceremonies recognizing illegitimate children, and financial provisions that ensured Maria's family lived in royal comfort. The soft crackle of letters being sealed with imperial wax, the gentle footsteps of servants maintaining parallel royal households, the whispered conversations about which children truly held their father's heart. Alexander's official marriage remained childless while his secret family thrived, creating succession complications that contributed to the Decembrist revolt after his death. What kind of love sustains itself in shadows for 20 years while empires rise and fall in the light? You're walking through Stockholm's royal palace in winter, where Europe's most unconventional queen sacrificed her crown for freedoms that included the right to love without dynastic obligations. Queen Christina, who ruled Sweden from 1644 to 1654, conducted passionate affairs with both men and women while refusing to marry and produce heirs, ultimately abdicating to live as she chose. Her relationship with Count Magnus de la Gardie scandalized the Protestant court, while her conversion to Catholicism and move to Rome shocked Protestant Europe. Court ceremonies became theatrical performances hiding Christina's true nature, with elaborate masquerades allowing forbidden intimacies and secret religious practices. The soft whisper of Latin prayers in Protestant palaces, the gentle rustle of masculine clothing worn by a queen who rejected feminine roles, the muffled conversations of advisors who watched their monarch choose personal authenticity over royal duty. Christina's abdication preserved Swedish succession, while allowing her to live openly in Rome as Europe's most fascinating royal exile. How many crowns have been abandoned not from weakness, but from the strength to choose authenticity over expectation? You're entering the magnificent halls of Fatehpur Sikri, where the greatest Mughal emperor created a new form of royal marriage that scandalized Orthodox Muslims and transformed Indian civilization. Akbar the Great married Hindu princesses like Jyotibai and included them in court ceremonies, allowing them to maintain their faith and influence imperial policy in ways that broke centuries of Islamic tradition. These interfaith marriages required elaborate protocols, balancing Muslim and Hindu customs, creating court ceremonies that honored multiple gods while maintaining imperial authority. The gentle sound of Sanskrit prayers mixing with Islamic calls to prayer, the soft rustle of saris worn by queens in Mughal palaces, the whispered debates of Islamic scholars who questioned their emperor's religious innovations. Akbar's religious tolerance, partially inspired by his Hindu wives' influence, created a syncretic culture that defined Mughal India for centuries. These marriages represented political betrayal of Orthodox Islam, while creating the cultural synthesis that became India's greatest imperial achievement. What empires have been strengthened not by religious purity, but by the courage to embrace the faiths of those they governed? You're walking beneath the cold stone arches of medieval Paris, where rumors once spread faster than fire in dry timber. In 1314, King Philip IV's 3 daughters-in-law, Margaret, Blanche, and Joan, were accused of carrying on secret affairs with young knights in the Tower of Nesle. The scandal erupted when Philip's daughter, Isabella, Queen of England, exposed them. Court ceremonies suddenly turned into interrogations, their fine dresses replaced by prison garb, as whispers of adultery shook the very foundation of the Capetian dynasty. The muffled clinking of chains, the soft sobs of noble women fallen from grace, and the quiet prayers of knights dragged to to their deaths filled the French court. Margaret and Blanche were imprisoned, their reputations destroyed, while Joan barely escaped conviction. The scandal delegitimized their children, setting the stage for dynastic crises that would later explode into the 100 Years' War. How many wars were born from whispered betrayals in candlelit towers? You're walking through the ruins of Persepolis as desert winds carry whispers of the conspiracy that may have cost Persia its last great king before Alexander's conquest. Darius III faced betrayal not only from Macedonian armies but potentially from within his own harem, where royal women may have conspired with nobles who sought accommodation with the conquering Greeks. Persian court protocol placed immense power in the hands of the queen mother and royal wives, who controlled access to the king and influenced succession decisions through networks of eunuchs and loyal guards. Palace ceremonies became opportunities for secret meetings, coded messages, and the quiet arrangements that determined whether the empire would resist or surrender to Alexander. The soft whisper of silk curtains concealing treacherous conversations, the gentle clink of jewelry being offered as bribes to palace guards, the muffled sounds of royal women choosing survival over honor. Whether real or imagined, these suspicions of harem betrayal haunted Darius's final campaigns and contributed to the empire's collapse. How many empires have fallen not to external enemies, but to the fear that those closest to power could no longer be trusted? You're standing in Winchester Cathedral as winter light filters through ancient glass, where England's first acknowledged female ruler fought a 19-year civil war to claim the throne her father promised and her cousin stole. Empress Matilda, daughter of Henry I, was betrayed by her cousin Stephen, who seized the crown in 1135, despite oaths of loyalty sworn to recognize her as legitimate heir. The civil war that followed, known as the Anarchy, devastated England, as nobles chose sides between a woman with legal right and a man with traditional gender expectations. Court ceremonies became political statements. Nobles who crowned Stephen implicitly rejected female rule, while those who supported Matilda challenged fundamental assumptions about royal gender. The soft rustle of legal documents proclaiming competing monarchs, the gentle clink of coins minted with rival royal portraits, the whispered prayers of monks who recorded history while avoiding taking sides. Matilda's ultimate compromise, accepting Stephen as king while ensuring her son Henry II inherited, established precedents for female succession that would echo through English history. How many rightful queens have been forced to fight wars simply for the right to rule with the same authority given freely to their brothers? Dear listeners, let the call to prayer drift across Istanbul's 7 hills as we witness how the Ottoman Empire's longest reigning sultan surrendered real power to viziers who saved the empire by betraying traditional royal authority. Mehmed IV, ruling from 1648 to 1687, allowed the Köprülü family of grand viziers to govern while he focused on hunting and pleasure, creating a constitutional monarchy disguised as absolute rule. This arrangement rescued the empire from chaos, but represented the ultimate royal betrayal, a sultan who chose personal comfort over imperial responsibility. Palace ceremonies continued with full imperial pomp, while real decisions were made in the Grand Vizier's offices, creating an elaborate fiction that masked the transfer of power from dynasty to bureaucracy. The soft footsteps of sultans walking through halls where they no longer ruled, the gentle rustle of documents signed without being read, the muffled conversations of viziers who governed an empire while maintaining the pretense of serving an absolute monarch. The Köprülü Restoration saved Ottoman power but established precedents that would eventually limit sultanic authority permanently. What kind of betrayal saves an empire by admitting that its traditional ruler is no longer capable of effective leadership? You're sitting by a crackling fire as December snow falls outside, witnessing the most shocking royal abdication in modern history unfold through radio broadcasts that changed the British Empire forever. King Edward VIII chose love over duty in 1936, abandoning his throne to Mary Wallace Simpson, an American divorcee whose past scandals made her unacceptable as queen to church and government. Palace protocol demanded absolute discretion, but newspapers worldwide buzzed with rumors of secret meetings, hidden photographs, and a romance that threatened the monarchy's moral authority. The gentle static of radio broadcasts carrying unprecedented royal confessions, the soft rustle of newspaper headlines proclaiming constitutional crisis, the muffled conversations of subjects who couldn't believe their king would abandon them for an unsuitable woman. Edward's abdication speech became one of history's most famous royal betrayals, transforming him from emperor to exile, while elevating his stammering brother George VI to unexpected greatness. How many empires have been saved by the unexpected courage of those never meant to rule? Dear listeners, let desert winds whisper across ancient sand dunes as we enter the sun-baked capital of Amarna, where Egypt's most controversial pharaoh betrayed 3,000 years of religious tradition for love and revolutionary faith. Akhenaten abandoned the traditional Egyptian pantheon to worship only Aten, the sun disk, while his queen Nefertiti became co-ruler in an unprecedented partnership that shocked the ancient world. Their religious revolution required destroying temples, defacing monuments, and creating entirely new court ceremonies that honored a single god rather than the complex mythology that had sustained Egyptian civilization. The soft chime of new hymns replacing ancient chants, the gentle hammer blows of workers erasing traditional hieroglyphs, the whispered concerns of priests who watched their gods disappear from royal art. Nefertiti mysteriously vanished from historical records, possibly dying in disgrace or ruling briefly as pharaoh herself, while their son-in-law Tutankhamun restored traditional religion and erased most traces of the heretic dynasty from official memory. What happens when royal love becomes so powerful it attempts to remake the gods themselves? You're walking through the elegant halls of the royal castle in Warsaw, where Poland's final monarch owed his throne to a love affair with the woman who would ultimately destroy his kingdom. Stanisław August Poniatowski became king in 1764, largely because Catherine the Great, his former lover, supported his election to serve Russian interests in Poland. Their relationship began when he was a young diplomat, and she was still Grand Duchess, creating bonds that later influenced the fate of entire nations. Court ceremonies became exercises in diplomatic theater, with the Polish king hosting elaborate receptions while secretly coordinating with his former mistress, who now ruled the empire, dismembering his country. The soft rustle of secret diplomatic correspondence, the gentle clink of wine glasses toasting Poland's independence while planning its partition, the muffled sounds of a king torn between personal loyalty and patriotic duty. Catherine's affection for Stanisław couldn't prevent her from participating in Poland's destruction, making their romance one of history's most politically tragic love affairs. How many nations have been betrayed by rulers who loved their enemies more than their own people's freedom? Dear listeners, settle into purple silk as we enter the golden age of Byzantium, where the greatest emperor in Roman history married a former actress and courtesan, scandalizing the aristocracy while creating the most powerful imperial partnership in medieval history. Justinian's marriage to Theodora in 525 required changing Roman law, which previously forbade senators from marrying actresses, transforming personal desire into legal revolution. Theodora's humble origins as a circus performer and courtesan made her unsuitable by traditional standards, but her political intelligence and fierce loyalty made her Justinian's equal partner in governance. Court ceremonies had to be redesigned to accommodate an empress who refused to remain silent or invisible, creating new protocols that recognized feminine political authority in ways that shocked traditional Roman sensibilities. The soft applause echoing from imperial theaters, the gentle scratch of new laws being written to legitimize forbidden love, the whispered amazement of courtiers who watched a former entertainer command emperors and generals. Their partnership survived the Nika riots, reconquered much of the Western Empire, and created the Justinian Code that influenced law for centuries. What empires have been strengthened by rulers brave enough to marry beneath their station, but above their capabilities? You're climbing the fairy tale stairs of Neuschwanstein Castle as alpine mist drifts through Gothic windows, where Bavaria's most romantic king hid his true nature behind architectural fantasies and Wagner operas. Ludwig II, ruling from 1864 to 1886, never married and conducted secret relationships with men, including his stablemaster and various courtiers, while building elaborate castles that served as refuges from a world that couldn't accept his sexuality. Court protocol required constant deception, staged engagements that were mysteriously broken, elaborate theatrical performances that provided cover for intimate friendships, and architectural projects that created private spaces away from prying eyes. The gentle echo of Wagner's music drifting through castle halls, the soft footsteps of secret lovers meeting in hidden chambers, the muffled conversations about a king whose subjects loved his fairy tale castles while remaining ignorant of his fairy tale romances. Ludwig's ministers eventually declared him insane and deposed him, leading to his mysterious death in Lake Starnberg, making him a martyr to both royal extravagance and hidden love. How many kings have built monuments to beauty because they couldn't build lives that allowed them to love freely? You're standing in the Golden Temple at Amritsar as evening prayers drift across sacred waters, where the greatest Sikh ruler's death unleashed a succession crisis that destroyed his empire through family betrayals and foreign manipulation. Ranjit Singh, the Lion of Punjab, died in 1839, leaving multiple wives, concubines, and children whose competing claims to the throne created chaos that the British East India Company eagerly exploited. Court traditions allowed polygamy but provided no clear succession rules, leading to palace intrigues, assassinations, and civil wars that weakened the Sikh empire from within. Palace ceremonies became opportunities for poison and plotting, with royal widows burning themselves on funeral pyres to avoid being murdered by rivals, while surviving princes fought bloody battles for a throne that British forces were systematically undermining. The soft chanting of Sikh prayers mixing with sounds of civil war, the gentle splash of tears falling into temple pools, the whispered strategies of British agents who encouraged royal family members to destroy each other. Within a decade, the mighty Sikh empire fell to British conquest, its strength dissipated through internal betrayals that turned brothers into enemies. How many great empires have collapsed not from external invasion, but from families that forgot how to trust each other? Dear listeners, let Carpathian winds whisper through Bucharest's grand boulevards as we witness how a king's love for a Jewish woman nearly destroyed his dynasty in an era of rising European anti-Semitism. Carol II returned from exile in 1930 with his mistress, Magda Lupescu, whose presence at court scandalized Romanian society and provided ammunition for fascist movements that used their relationship to attack the monarchy's legitimacy. Court protocol struggled to accommodate Magda's unofficial status. She lived in the palace but couldn't appear at state functions, influenced policy while remaining legally powerless, and faced constant death threats from anti-Semitic extremists. Palace ceremonies became exercises in calculated absence, with elaborate state dinners where the king's most trusted advisor remained invisible, while newspapers raged about foreign influence corrupting Romanian royalty. The soft rustle of death threats being delivered to palace gates, the gentle clink of jewelry being worn by a woman who could never officially exist, the muffled prayers of a Jewish woman who loved a Christian king in a country being consumed by hatred. Carol's eventual abdication in 1940 came partly because his relationship with Magda made him vulnerable to Nazi pressure. How many royal love stories become national tragedies when private affection collides with public hatred? You're walking through the ancient churches of Lalibela as incense drifts through stone corridors, where Ethiopia's last emperor maintained power through elaborate deceptions about his divine heritage and hidden vulnerabilities that ultimately cost him his throne. Haile Selassie claimed direct descent from King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, but court insiders knew his rise to power involved betraying his predecessor's designated heir and manipulating succession laws to favor his branch of the royal family. Ethiopian court ceremonies emphasized the emperor's divine nature through elaborate prostration rituals, golden thrones, and religious pageantry that masked the political machinations behind his crown. Palace protocols required absolute submission to imperial authority, but revolutionary movements eventually exposed how the emperor's divine image concealed systematic corruption, famine mismanagement, and the suppression of democratic reform. The soft chanting of orthodox liturgies proclaiming imperial divinity, the gentle rustle of ceremonial robes hiding mortal weakness, the whispered conversations of revolutionaries who dared to question divine right. Haile Selassie's fall in 1974 revealed how completely his mystical authority had depended on subjects who chose to believe in royal divinity rather than demand accountable governance. What happens when emperors who claim to be gods are revealed to be merely men with exceptional public relations skills? You're sailing down the Nile as palm trees sway in desert breezes, witnessing how Egypt's last king destroyed his dynasty through personal scandals, corruption, and betrayals that made him a symbol of royal decadence in an era demanding social justice. Farouk Wahid, ruling from 1936 to 1952, became notorious for his gambling, obesity, and collection of mistresses, while Egypt struggled with poverty, political instability, and British occupation. Court life became a continuous party where the king collected trinkets, hosted orgies, and ignored growing revolutionary sentiment among officers who watched their sovereign embarrass the nation through childish behavior and conspicuous consumption. Palace ceremonies celebrating royal excess took place while Egyptian soldiers died fighting Israel with inadequate equipment, creating stark contrasts between royal luxury and national humiliation. The soft shuffle of playing cards in palace gaming rooms, the gentle laughter of European socialites enjoying royal hospitality, the muffled anger of military officers who planned revolution while their king played with toys and mistresses. Farouk's overthrow by the free officers in 1952 ended centuries of monarchy and established Egypt as a republic led by men who had served a king they could no longer respect. How many dynasties have ended not with foreign conquest or natural disaster, but with rulers too selfish to understand their responsibilities? Step into the gilded corridors of Versailles, where perfume masked the scent of danger. Madame de Montespan, Louis XIV's brilliant and fiery mistress, bore him 7 children while married to another man, but her power collapsed when her name became linked to a network of poisoners and witches in the 1670s. Secret baptisms of their illegitimate children were conducted at midnight. Courtiers sworn to silence. The soft crackle of wax seals on falsified birth records, the gentle murmur of priests blessing children the law would never acknowledge, and the muffled whispers of Parisian fortune-tellers marked this betrayal. Though Montespan was never formally convicted, her fall from grace left a shadow over Versailles and demonstrated how illegitimate heirs could shift the balance of power in the most glittering court in Europe. How many golden palaces concealed children raised in the shadows? You're walking through Brighton's royal pavilion as sea breezes carry whispers of England's most scandalous royal secret, where a future king illegally married a Catholic widow in defiance of church and law. George, Prince of Wales, secretly wed Maria Fitzherbert in 1785, creating a marriage that was both invalid under English law and treasonous under the Act of Settlement that forbade royals from marrying Catholics. Court ceremonies required elaborate deceptions, public appearances with his legal wife Caroline while privately maintaining households with his beloved Maria, whom he considered his true wife before God. Palace servants arranged parallel domestic arrangements, with Maria receiving royal treatment while being denied official recognition, creating a shadow court that lasted decades. The soft rustle of secret wedding certificates hidden in private safes, the gentle clink of duplicate household keys, the muffled conversations of priests who performed forbidden ceremonies. George's death in 1830 revealed love letters, jewelry, and documents proving their relationship's depth. But Maria's Catholic faith meant their love could never be officially acknowledged by Protestant England. How many great loves have been destroyed not by incompatibility, but by laws that made affection itself illegal? Dear listeners, let the Danube waltz carry you into the gilded halls of the Hofburg Palace, where Austria's most beautiful empress found love with the Hungarian revolutionary who had once been sentenced to death for treason against her husband's empire. Elizabeth, married to Emperor Franz Joseph, conducted a decades-long emotional affair with Count Gyula Andrássy, the charismatic Hungarian statesman who helped create the Austro-Hungarian Compromise of 1867. Their relationship required diplomatic discretion, secret meetings disguised as political negotiations, coded correspondence about Hungarian autonomy that concealed personal passion, and court ceremonies where Elizabeth's obvious favoritism toward Hungarian causes revealed her heart's true allegiance. Palace protocols allowed Elizabeth unprecedented freedom to travel and pursue personal interests, but gossips whispered about her devotion to Hungarian culture and its most handsome representative. The soft melody of Hungarian folk songs played in Austrian palaces, the gentle scratch of letters written in languages most courtiers couldn't read, the muffled conversations of servants who noticed their empress wore Hungarian colors more often than Austrian ones. Elizabeth's assassination in 1898 ended one of history's most politically complex love affairs. What empires have been reshaped by queens who loved their husbands' former enemies more than their own people? You're entering Christiansborg Palace as Baltic winds howl through Danish winters, where a German doctor became the real ruler of Denmark by controlling a mentally ill king and seducing his neglected queen. Christian VII's physician, Johann Friedrich Struensee, gained complete influence over the unstable monarch while beginning a passionate affair with Queen Caroline Matilda that produced an illegitimate daughter. Court life became theatrical performance with Struensee pulling strings. The Mad King signed reforms he didn't understand while his German doctor implemented Enlightenment policies that transformed Denmark's legal system, abolished censorship, and freed the serfs. Palace ceremonies maintained royal dignity, while real power shifted to a commoner whose relationship with the queen made him effective regent of the kingdom. The soft rustle of reform documents being signed by trembling royal hands, the gentle footsteps of secret lovers meeting in queen's chambers, the whispered concerns of Danish nobles who watched a foreigner remake their country through influence over crown and queen. Struensee's execution in 1772 ended Denmark's most progressive period and left Caroline Matilda exiled, pregnant, and heartbroken. How many kingdoms have been revolutionized by love affairs that gave commoners access to royal power? Dear listeners, let Turkish coffee steam as we carefully enter the most troubled chapter of Ottoman history, where a psychologically damaged sultan's relationship with his harem nearly destroyed the empire through extravagance and madness. Ibrahim of Ur, ruling from 1640 to 1648, became obsessed with his concubines to the degree that state governance collapsed while he focused entirely on harem pleasures, bankrupting the empire through gifts to his women. Court protocols designed to regulate imperial sexuality completely broke down as Ibrahim demanded constant access to his concubines, ignoring state ceremonies, military crises, and financial disasters while pursuing increasingly elaborate harem entertainments. Palace life centered entirely around sultans' sexual appetites, with government officials unable to gain audience while harem women received treasures that emptied the imperial treasury and sparked revolts across the empire. The soft splash of fountains in abandoned council chambers, the gentle rustle of silk robes worn by concubines who wielded more influence than viziers, the muffled prayers of officials who watched their empire crumble while their sultan played with his favorites. Ibrahim's deposition and execution by his own janissaries saved the Ottoman dynasty, but demonstrated how completely personal obsessions could paralyze even the world's most powerful empires. What happens when rulers become so consumed by private pleasure that they forget public duty entirely? You're standing on volcanic shores as Pacific waves whisper ancient Hawaiian secrets about the great king who unified the islands through marriages that violated sacred taboos and created new forms of royal legitimacy. Kamehameha the Great married his sacred half-sister Keopuolani to combine their divine bloodlines, creating children with maximum mana, spiritual power, while breaking traditional kapu, taboo restrictions that had governed Hawaiian royalty for centuries. Court ceremonies blended ancient Hawaiian traditions with new protocols acknowledging Kamehameha's revolutionary approach to sacred marriage, creating rituals that honored traditional spirits while accepting previously forbidden unions. Hawaiian nobles struggled to adapt to their king's religious innovations, which challenged fundamental beliefs about divine bloodlines while creating practical advantages in his campaign to unify all Hawaiian islands under single rule. The soft chanting of ancient Hawaiian genealogies being rewritten to accommodate new marriages, the gentle splash of sacred springs where forbidden unions were blessed, the whispered debates of priests who wondered whether their king's violations of kapu would bring divine punishment or divine favor. Kamehameha's successful unification seemed to prove that gods approved his innovations, transforming Hawaiian concepts of royal marriage and sacred bloodlines forever. How many religious traditions have been revolutionized by kings who dared to marry forbidden loves and succeeded anyway? Dear listeners, let tropical monsoons drum against palace walls as we separate Hollywood fantasy from the reality of Siam's modernizing monarch and his British governess, whose relationship was far more complex and less romantic than popular culture suggests. King Mongkut hired Anna Leonovens in 1862 to educate his children in Western languages and customs, creating a cross-cultural exchange that influenced Siamese modernization while generating misunderstandings that would be distorted by later Western accounts. Court protocols required careful navigation between Siamese traditions, demanding royal reverence, and British customs, emphasizing individual dignity, leading to conflicts that Anna later exaggerated in memoirs that portrayed Mongkut as a barbaric despot, rather than the scholarly reformer he actually was. Palace life involved genuine cultural exchange, the king learning English poetry while Anna studied Thai customs. But their relationship remained strictly professional despite Anna's later romantic embellishments. The soft sound of English lessons being conducted in ancient Siamese palaces, the gentle rustle of Western books being translated into Thai script, the muffled conversations of courtiers who wondered about their king's foreign teacher. Anna's sensationalized accounts became the basis for Western stereotypes about Asian despotism, while ignoring Mongkut's genuine efforts to modernize Siam peacefully. How many cross-cultural relationships have been distorted by people who transformed professional respect into fictional romance? You're walking across the African veldt as dawn breaks over Zululand, where the greatest military genius in southern African history was shaped by his illegitimate birth and his fierce devotion to the mother who raised him despite social rejection. Shaka Zulu, born around 1787, was conceived when his father Senzangakona briefly violated tribal protocol by having relations with Nandi of the neighboring Langeni clan, creating a pregnancy that both tribes initially denied. Zulu court customs demanded that illegitimate children remain with their father's clan, but Nandi's strong personality and Shaka's obvious intelligence eventually won acceptance despite their irregular status and years of social ostracism that shaped the future king's character. Traditional ceremonies celebrating Nandi's status as royal mother had to be invented after Shaka's rise to power, as Zulu culture provided no precedent for honoring a woman whose liaison had initially been considered scandalous. The soft, rhythmic stamping of Zulu war dances honoring Nandi's memory, the gentle click of traditional praise songs recounting Shaka's legitimization of his own birth, the whispered stories of how maternal love transformed an illegitimate child into Africa's most feared warrior. Nandi's death in 1827 reportedly drove Shaka to such grief that he imposed nationwide mourning that destabilized his kingdom. How many great leaders have been forged by the determination to prove that illegitimate birth cannot diminish legitimate greatness? Imagine walking through Gothic Prague in the 14th century, where King Charles IV, future Holy Roman Emperor, secretly maintained overlapping marriages in defiance of canon law. His unions with Blanche of Valois, then Anna of Bavaria, and later Anna von Schweidnitz overlapped with relationships unacknowledged in official chronicles. The soft toll of church bells masking whispered vows, the muffled prayers of priests who dared not oppose the emperor, and the rustle of parchments where papal dispensations were backdated created an atmosphere of controlled scandal. Though legitimized retroactively, these overlapping unions left questions about the true legitimacy of some of his children, undermining dynastic clarity. How many royal lineages began with vows whispered in the wrong order? Dear listeners, let Mediterranean breezes carry the scent of olive groves as we witness how Italy's diminutive monarch betrayed constitutional principles by allowing Mussolini to seize power through legal manipulation and royal weakness. Victor Emmanuel III, standing barely 5 feet tall, felt physically and politically intimidated by the charismatic fascist leader who demanded to be appointed prime minister after the March on Rome in 1922. Court ceremonies became exercises in constitutional subversion as the king maintained royal dignity while systematically surrendering democratic governance to fascist control, betraying his oath to protect Italy's parliamentary system. Palace protocols adapted to accommodate Mussolini's theatrical style. Military uniforms in royal audiences. Fascist salutes alongside traditional court bows, and royal endorsement of laws that dismantled the liberal state. The soft echo of jackboots in marble halls designed for silk slippers. The gentle rustle of constitutional documents being ignored by royal decree, the muffled protests of democratic politicians who watched their king collaborate with dictatorship. Victor Emmanuel's abdication in 1946 ended the House of Savoy's rule and established the Italian Republic, making his fascist collaboration the final betrayal that cost his dynasty their ancient throne. His physical stature became a metaphor for his moral weakness in choosing personal survival over constitutional duty. How many small men have made themselves even smaller by betraying the principles they swore to protect? You're walking through the rose gardens of Golestan Palace as Persian poetry echoes through Isfahan's ancient arches, where Iran's last Shah sacrificed his deepest love for dynastic necessity and political survival. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi divorced his beloved second wife, Soraya, in 1958, solely because their 7-year marriage produced no male heir, choosing imperial succession over personal happiness in a decision that haunted both their lives. Court life became increasingly melancholy as the royal couple pursued fertility treatments, consulted specialists, and endured whispered speculation about their childlessness while maintaining public dignity and official optimism about eventual conception. Persian ceremonies celebrating marriage and fertility became painful reminders of their failure, with traditional blessings for royal offspring highlighting the absence that would ultimately destroy their union despite mutual devotion. The soft weeping of nightingales in palace gardens that would never hear royal children's laughter, the gentle rustle of medical reports hidden from public view, the muffled conversations of doctors who could not solve the problem that would remake Iranian history. Soraya's exile to Europe and the Shah's subsequent marriage to Farah produced the heir he needed, but cost him the woman he loved, creating emotional wounds that never healed and contributed to the isolation that made him vulnerable to revolutionary forces. How many dynasties have been saved by personal sacrifices that left their rulers too heartbroken to govern effectively? You're strolling through Madrid's Retiro Park as Spanish guitars whisper tales of the last Bourbon king whose numerous affairs nearly destroyed the monarchy through scandal and neglect. Alfonso XIII maintained relationships with opera singers, aristocrats, and commoners, while his queen suffered through multiple miscarriages and political crises that demanded his attention. Court ceremonies became exercises in managing scandal, elaborate state dinners where mistresses couldn't attend, charity events where the queen appeared alone, and military reviews where Alfonso's mind wandered to romantic assignations. The gentle strum of flamenco music covering whispered gossip, the soft rustle of love letters hidden in royal desk drawers, the muffled conversations of servants arranging secret meetings. His obsession with women contributed to political neglect that allowed military coups, regional revolts, and economic chaos to destabilize Spain throughout his reign. How many kingdoms have crumbled because their kings cared more about conquering hearts than governing nations? Dear listeners, let Vienna waltzes drift through palace ballrooms as we witness how the last Austro-Hungarian empress secretly negotiated with enemy powers while her empire fought World War I. Empress Zita, wife of Emperor Charles I, conducted clandestine peace talks with France through her brother Prince Sixtus, betraying her German allies while trying to save her crumbling dynasty. Court protocols demanded loyalty to the Central Powers, but Zita's secret diplomacy offered territorial concessions and separate peace in exchange for Habsburg survival, creating a dangerous game that could have been seen as treason. Palace life involved elaborate deceptions, official receptions celebrating German friendship, while private letters promised French cooperation, state ceremonies honoring military alliances while secret envoys negotiated their dissolution. The soft waltz music masking treasonous conversations, the gentle scratch of secret treaties being drafted, the whispered prayers of an empress who chose dynasty over alliance. The Sixtus affair's exposure in 1918 destroyed Habsburg credibility and hastened the empire's collapse. What price do dynasties pay when survival requires betraying the very alliances that sustained their power? You're standing in the candlelit halls of Holyrood Palace in 1567, where Mary, Queen of Scots, shocked her nobles by marrying James Hepburn, the Earl of Bothwell, who was suspected of murdering her previous husband, Lord Darnley. This hasty and suspicious union tarnished her legitimacy, with whispers that her unborn child might not be royal at all. Court rituals became hollow displays as nobles deserted her. The soft sound of parchment filled with accusations, replacing music and prayers. Within months, she was imprisoned, her crown stripped away. Her son, James VI, declared king while she languished in captivity. The scandal of her marriage poisoned her reputation forever, turning her into the tragic queen whose love and ambition were inseparable from betrayal. How many crowns have been lost to whispers about bloodlines stained by scandal? Dear listeners, let Nile breezes mingle with Persian roses as we explore the fairy tale marriage between Egyptian Princess Fawzia and Iran's young Shah that became a diplomatic disaster and personal tragedy. Fawzia, King Farouk's sister, married Mohammad Reza Pahlavi in 1939 in a union designed to unite Sunni and Shia Islam while creating strategic alliance between Egypt and Iran. Court life required navigating cultural differences, Egyptian informality versus Persian formality, Arabic traditions versus Persian customs and religious practices that varied despite shared Islamic faith. Palace ceremonies attempted to blend Egyptian and Iranian traditions through elaborate compromises that satisfied neither culture, creating awkward rituals that highlighted differences rather than commonalities between two proud civilizations. The soft sound of Arabic prayers mixing with Persian supplications. The gentle rustle of Egyptian cotton competing with Persian silk. The muffled conversations of courtiers who struggled to communicate across language barriers. Their divorce in 1948 reflected not personal incompatibility, but the impossibility of merging distinct royal cultures through arranged marriage alone. What happens when political marriages attempt to bridge not just kingdoms, but entirely different ways of understanding royal authority? You're moving through the perfume-thick air of the Valois court, where Catherine de' Medici, queen and later regent of France, ruled with iron subtlety. Yet whispers claimed that not all children around her court were legitimate. Allegations swirled that certain royal infants were smuggled into the nursery to secure dynastic continuity. Court rituals of baptism and blessing masked secrets, the gentle cries of newborns hidden behind silken curtains, the muffled gossip of wet nurses whose silence was purchased with gold. Though no proof survives, the suspicion of manipulated bloodlines became a weapon in the religious wars that tore France apart. How many thrones stood on foundations of forged births and silenced mothers? Dear listeners, let Ethiopian highland breezes carry ancient songs as we discover how African royal families struggled to maintain traditional authority while adapting to 20th century expectations and opportunities. Princess Tenenwerk, granddaughter of Emperor Haile Selassie, became involved in various scandals that reflected the broader challenges facing Ethiopian royalty in a modernizing world that questioned traditional monarchy. Palace life attempted to balance ancient Ethiopian customs with international diplomatic requirements, creating situations where royal women faced impossible choices between traditional obedience and modern independence that their education and travels had shown them. Court ceremonies honored ancestral traditions while acknowledging that younger royals had been educated abroad and returned with ideas that challenged fundamental assumptions about gender roles, political authority, and social hierarchy in traditional Ethiopian society. The soft sound of traditional Ethiopian music competing with Western melodies, the gentle rustle of traditional white cotton shawls worn over European dresses, the muffled conversations about whether African royalty could survive in a world increasingly hostile to hereditary privilege. The 1974 revolution ended Ethiopian monarchy, but the royal family's struggles with modernity had already begun undermining traditional authority. What happens to royal traditions when the people they're supposed to govern no longer believe in the divine nature of hereditary rule? Step into the shadowy chambers of Prague Castle at the turn of the 17th century, where Emperor Rudolph II of the Holy Roman Empire, eccentric and melancholic, carried on an affair with Caterina Strada, the daughter of an art dealer. Their relationship produced several illegitimate children, quietly baptized in secluded chapels away from the eyes of Vienna's court, the soft scrape of quills falsifying genealogies, the muffled clink of coins paid to loyal servants, and the hushed prayers of priests bound to secrecy all concealed this betrayal. While Rudolph's obsession with alchemy and astronomy consumed him, Katerina's children became bargaining chips in dynastic negotiations, their illegitimate blood carrying both privilege and stigma. How many forgotten heirs carried royal names hidden in the footnotes of history? You're walking through the Spanish court of the 14th century, where King Alfonso XI openly favored his mistress, Leonor de Guzman, over his queen, Maria of Portugal. Leonor bore him 10 illegitimate children, showered with titles and lands, while the queen's influence dwindled. The gentle rustle of secret letters arranging estates, the soft coo of infants whose existence threatened dynastic order, the muffled fury of a queen betrayed filled the air of Castile. When Alfonso died, Maria avenged herself by imprisoning and executing Leonor, igniting a bitter civil war between Leonor's illegitimate offspring and the queen's legitimate heir, Pedro the Cruel. Betrayal had been transformed into dynastic fracture, setting Spain ablaze for decades. How many kingdoms have bled because of a king's unwillingness to forsake his mistress? You're pacing the dim corridors of the Bastille, where one of France's most enduring mysteries unfolded. Rumors claimed that Anne of Austria, Queen of France, and mother of Louis XIV, secretly bore a second son, an identical twin to the future Sun King. Court gossip whispered that the twin was hidden away to prevent disputes over succession. The muffled clank of prison doors, the soft scratching of coded diaries, and the rustle of veiled disguises shrouded the tale in secrecy. Whether a myth or hidden truth, the legend of the man in the iron mask suggested a betrayal of dynastic order so profound it haunted French imagination for centuries. How many kingdoms silenced brothers to secure a single throne? You're walking through Madrid's royal palace in the mid-19th century, where Queen Isabella II reigned amid endless whispers about her private life. Her marriage to King Consort Francis of Cadiz was loveless, and rumors insisted that her son, the future Alfonso XII, was not the king's child at all, but the product of her affairs with military officers. Court ceremonies presented the boy as heir, but the muffled laughter of courtiers, the quiet exchange of compromising letters, and the soft echo of Madrid's salons kept the scandal alive. Whether true or not, the suspicion of illegitimacy weakened Isabella's rule and helped fuel revolution. How many crowns tremble when the heir's true father cannot be spoken of aloud? You're kneeling in Canterbury Cathedral as winter light filters through stained glass, where England's most famous royal friendship ended in murder and martyrdom. Henry II appointed his drinking companion, Thomas Becket, as Archbishop of Canterbury in 1162, expecting loyalty but receiving defiance as Becket defended church rights against royal authority. Court ceremonies became battlegrounds between secular and religious power, with former friends refusing to speak directly while their representatives negotiated increasingly hostile terms that satisfied neither crown nor church. Palace life turned awkward as courtiers watched their king rage against the man he'd once trusted completely, while church ceremonies became political statements of resistance to royal control over religious matters. The gentle echo of prayers in stone cathedrals, the soft scratch of excommunication documents being prepared, the whispered conversations of knights who heard their king's frustrated wish that someone would rid him of his troublesome priest. Becket's murder in 1170 transformed him into England's greatest martyr and forced Henry into humiliating public penance. How many friendships have been destroyed by the impossible choice between personal loyalty and institutional duty? Dear listeners, let Roman fountains whisper as we enter the marble halls where history's most notorious emperor murdered his first wife to marry his pregnant mistress, shocking even jaded Roman society. Nero divorced and executed Octavia in 62 AD to wed Poppaea Sabina, who had been his mistress while married to his friend Otho, creating a scandal that combined adultery, murder, and imperial abuse of power. Court ceremonies attempted to legitimize their union through elaborate religious rituals and public celebrations, but Roman citizens understood that their emperor had committed crimes that would have been punished by death if committed by ordinary citizens. Palace life revolved around Poppaea's whims and beauty treatments, with the empire's resources devoted to her cosmetic experiments, golden bathhouses, and the hundreds of donkeys whose milk preserved her legendary complexion. The soft splash of perfumed water in imperial baths, the gentle rustle of silk being draped over furniture that cost more than armies, the muffled prayers of Romans who wondered whether their gods would punish such imperial excess. Poppaea's death in 65 AD, possibly from Nero's own violence, added domestic murder to his growing list of crimes against family and state. What happens to empires when their rulers believe that absolute power includes the right to destroy anyone they once claimed to love? You're walking through Stockholm's snowy streets as Baltic winds carry tales of Sweden's most deluded monarch, who destroyed his kingdom through an obsessive hatred of Napoleon that blinded him to military and diplomatic reality. Gustav IV Adolf refused all compromise with French power after 1805, maintaining hopeless alliances with defeated enemies while Sweden's army was crushed and its territory systematically conquered by French allies. Court ceremonies became exercises in denying reality, with elaborate military reviews celebrating victories that had never occurred and diplomatic receptions honoring allies who had already surrendered or switched sides to survive Napoleon's dominance. Palace life required careful management of the king's delusions about Swedish military power, with advisors learning to present devastating defeats as temporary setbacks, while their monarch planned increasingly unrealistic campaigns against impossible odds. The soft sound of military music played to empty parade grounds, the gentle rustle of outdated maps showing Swedish territories already lost to enemy occupation, the whispered concerns of ministers who watched their king's sanity deteriorate along with their nation's independence. Gustav's deposition in 1809 saved Sweden from complete destruction, but ended the absolute monarchy that had made such catastrophic leadership possible. How many kingdoms have been destroyed by rulers who confused personal vendetta with national interest? Dear listeners, let Indian monsoons drum against palace walls as we discover how Britain's youngest royal ward became its most dangerous enemy after learning the truth about his stolen kingdom. Dalip Singh, last Maharaja of the Sikh Empire, was raised in British comfort after his father's defeat, educated as an English gentleman while remaining ignorant of his true heritage and the empire Britain had stolen from his family. Court life in England treated him as exotic royalty. Elaborate hunting parties, introduction to Queen Victoria, and generous allowances that masked his essential powerlessness as a prisoner disguised as a guest in the nation that had conquered his homeland. Palace ceremonies honored him as Indian royalty, while systematically preventing any contact with Sikh culture, religion, or political awareness that might have revealed how completely he had been betrayed by his supposed protectors. The soft sound of English hymns replacing Sikh prayers, the gentle rustle of European clothing worn by a prince who had forgotten his traditional dress, the whispered conversations of British officials who wondered what would happen if Dalip ever learned the truth. His eventual rebellion against British rule in the 1880s proved that stolen princes eventually remember their stolen crowns. What kind of betrayal turns children of conquered kings into perfect English gentlemen, and what happens when they discover their true identity? You're standing in Bucharest's royal palace as Carpathian winds whisper stories of how Romania's first modern king nearly destroyed his adopted country by maintaining loyalty to his German homeland during World War I. Karol Wojs, a Hohenzollern prince who became Romania's king in 1866, faced an impossible choice in 1914 between his German blood and his Romanian crown when war erupted between his birth country and his adopted nation. Court ceremonies became exercises in diplomatic theater, with the German-born king hosting Romanian patriots who demanded war against Austria-Hungary while secretly corresponding with German relatives who expected family loyalty to transcend political borders. Palace life required careful choreography of public appearances designed to demonstrate Romanian patriotism while privately maintaining German connections that could be interpreted as treason by subjects who had accepted foreign royalty only because it served national interests. The soft sound of German lullabies sung in Romanian palaces, the gentle rustle of letters written in languages most Romanian nobles couldn't read, the whispered debates about whether imported kings could ever truly belong to their adopted countries. Carol's death in 1914 spared him from choosing between Germany and Romania, but his successor faced the consequences of divided royal loyalties. How many foreign princes have discovered that crowns borrowed from other nations come with obligations that conflict with the blood ties that created them? Dear listeners, let Mexican mariachi music drift through Chapultepec Castle as we witness how European royalty's attempt to create empire in the Americas ended in execution, madness, and the destruction of a fairy tale marriage. Maximilian of Austria accepted the Mexican throne in 1864 with his wife Charlotte, believing French promises of support while ignoring Mexican Republican resistance that would ultimately cost him his life and her sanity. Court ceremonies attempted to blend European imperial protocol with Mexican traditions, creating awkward rituals that satisfied neither Mexican nationals who rejected foreign rule nor European aristocrats who found colonial court life unsophisticated and dangerous. Palace life became increasingly desperate as French support disappeared, Republican forces advanced, and Charlotte's mental stability collapsed under the pressure of watching their dream of benevolent European rule in Mexico dissolve into civil war and international embarrassment. The soft sound of European waltzes played while revolutionary armies approached, the gentle rustle of imperial robes worn by rulers whose empire existed only in their imagination, the whispered prayers of European courtiers who realized they had followed their monarchs into a death trap. Maximilian's execution in 1867 ended the last attempt to establish European monarchy in the Americas, while Charlotte's madness lasted 60 years. What happens to royal dreams when they collide with the reality that some continents have moved beyond accepting foreign kings? You're standing on the African veldt as dawn breaks over Isandlwana, where the greatest Zulu king fought a hopeless war against British imperial expansion while trying to preserve his people's independence and traditional way of life. Cetshwayo ruled the Zulu kingdom from 1872 to 1879, maintaining traditional military organization while facing British demands that would have effectively ended Zulu sovereignty and cultural autonomy. Traditional ceremonies celebrating Zulu military prowess became preparations for a war that traditional weapons could not win, with ancient rituals honoring ancestors who had never faced rifled firearms, artillery, and the systematic military organization of industrial empire. Court life required balancing traditional Zulu customs with the diplomatic necessity of negotiating with British officials who had already decided that Zulu independence was incompatible with colonial expansion in southern Africa. The soft sound of traditional Zulu war songs mixed with British ultimatums, the gentle rustle of cowhide shields being prepared for battles against modern weapons, the whispered conversations of indunas who understood that courage alone could not defeat industrial military technology. Cetshwayo's defeat and exile in 1879 ended the last major African kingdom's resistance to European colonization in southern Africa. How many traditional kings have been forced to choose between hopeless resistance and cultural suicide through collaboration? Dear listeners, let Andalusian guitars whisper secrets as we discover how Spain's Restoration monarch secretly married his cousin before dynastic pressure forced him to choose duty over love. Alfonso XII privately wed his cousin Mercedes in 1878, but their happiness lasted only 6 months before her death from typhus created both personal tragedy and succession crisis that threatened the newly restored Bourbon dynasty. Court ceremonies attempted to balance genuine royal grief with the political necessity of remarriage, as Alfonso's ministers pressured him to find a new wife who could provide the male heirs that Spain's political stability required after decades of civil war and republican government. Palace life became melancholy performance with traditional royal protocols maintained while everyone understood that the king's heart had been buried with his first wife, making his second marriage to Marie Christine purely dynastic necessity rather than personal choice. The soft sound of funeral masses echoing through royal chapels, the gentle rustle of mourning clothes worn longer than protocol required, the whispered conversations of courtiers who wondered whether their grieving king would ever fully engage with his royal duties again. Alfonso's early death in 1885 left Spain under a regency that proved more stable than his actual reign. What kind of kingdom can survive when its king's heart remains buried with his first wife while his duty demands devotion to his second? You're climbing Ethiopian highlands as mountain eagles soar above ancient churches, where Africa's greatest diplomatic victory began with a treaty that said different things in different languages. Emperor Menelik II signed the Treaty of Wuchal in 1889, agreeing to Italian friendship while discovering that the Italian version claimed Ethiopia had become an Italian protectorate through translation differences that Italy tried to use to justify colonial rule. Court ceremonies maintained Ethiopian independence, while Italian diplomats claimed that these same rituals acknowledged Italian sovereignty, creating a diplomatic crisis that would be resolved only through military victory at Adwa in 1896. Palace life required careful management of European diplomatic missions who believed they were visiting an Italian colony while Ethiopian nobles understood they were hosting foreign guests in an independent empire that had never been conquered. The soft chanting of Orthodox liturgies celebrating Ethiopian independence, the gentle rustle of treaty documents that said different things depending on the language, the whispered conversations of advisors who realized that European diplomacy was often based on linguistic deception rather than honest negotiation. Menelik's victory at Adwa proved that African kingdoms could defeat European armies when properly organized and equipped. How many colonial disasters began with European diplomats who believed that Africans wouldn't notice deliberately mistranslated treaties? You're sailing across the Aegean Sea as Mediterranean winds carry stories of how a Bavarian prince became Greece's first modern king through European diplomatic arrangement that ignored Greek national sentiment and cultural identity. Otto Rührs, brother of Ludwig II, ruled Greece from 1832 to 1862 as a Catholic German prince governing an Orthodox Greek nation that had just won independence from Ottoman rule through its own revolutionary efforts. Court ceremonies attempted to blend Bavarian court protocol with Greek Orthodox traditions, creating awkward compromises that satisfied neither German advisors who expected European royal standards nor Greek citizens who wanted rulers who understood their language, religion, and culture. Palace life required constant translation between German administrative efficiency and Greek political expectations, with Otto's foreign advisors implementing policies that made sense in Bavaria but ignored Greek social realities and historical traditions. The soft sound of German being spoken in Greek palaces, the gentle rustle of European court dress worn to Orthodox religious ceremonies, the whispered complaints of Greek patriots who wondered why their hard-won independence had resulted in foreign royal rule. Otto's deposition in 1862 proved that imported monarchy works only when foreign princes learn to become genuine natives of their adopted countries. What happens when European powers give newly independent nations the gift of foreign kings who understand neither the language nor the culture they're supposed to govern? You're walking through the corridors of El Escorial as Spanish winds whisper tales of how Europe's most powerful monarch was betrayed by his most trusted advisor, who sold state secrets to enemies across the continent. Antonio Perez, Philip II's secretary, conducted affairs with the king's mistress, Princess Ana de Mendoza, while simultaneously passing Spanish intelligence to French and English agents throughout the 1570s. Court ceremonies became exercises in deception, as Perez attended council meetings where he learned Spanish military plans that he would later sell to enemy governments, creating a web of espionage that reached the highest levels of Habsburg administration. Palace life required constant vigilance as the king slowly discovered that his most intimate advisor had been systematically betraying Spanish interests while maintaining perfect appearances of loyalty and devotion to royal service. The soft scratch of secret codes being written in diplomatic correspondence, the gentle rustle of documents being copied for foreign agents, the whispered conversations of spies who had infiltrated the heart of Spanish government. Perez's eventual flight to France and England made him Europe's most famous royal traitor, while exposing the vulnerability of even the most secretive courts to infiltration. How many empires have been weakened more by the traitors within their palaces than by the enemies outside their borders? Dear listeners, let the evening call to prayer drift across Granada's ancient walls as we witness how Spain's most devout queen destroyed her husband's mistress in a fit of jealous rage that revealed the human passions beneath royal piety. Isabella discovered that Ferdinand had been conducting an affair with Beatrice de Bobadilla, one of her own ladies-in-waiting, leading to Beatrice's immediate banishment and marriage to a minor nobleman in the Canary Islands, where she could never again tempt the king. Court ceremonies continued with elaborate displays of royal unity, while everyone understood that the Queen's famous partnership with Ferdinand masked deep personal betrayals that threatened their political alliance and the unification of Spain they had worked decades to achieve. Palace life became tense performance art where royal couples appeared together at state functions, while servants whispered about passionate arguments, thrown objects, and the Queen's determination to remove any woman who attracted her husband's wandering eye. The soft sound of prayers being offered for royal marriage, while both partners pursued separate romantic interests. The gentle rustle of banishment orders being prepared in the Queen's private chambers, the muffled conversations of courtiers who learned never to mention certain names in royal presence. Isabella's jealous fury proved that even the most successful royal marriages could be undermined by the very human emotions that crown and scepter could never fully control. What kind of love survives when political partnership requires forgiving personal betrayals that would destroy ordinary marriages? You're strolling through the gardens of the Tuileries as Parisian fountains whisper secrets about how France's last empress used her Spanish heritage to influence European politics through family connections that her husband never fully understood. Empress Eugenie secretly corresponded with Spanish revolutionaries and conservative factions throughout the 1860s, using her position to advance Spanish interests that sometimes conflicted with French foreign policy and Napoleon III's diplomatic objectives. Court protocols allowed the Empress unprecedented influence over Spanish affairs through her role as cultural patron and religious advisor, creating parallel diplomatic channels that bypassed official French government oversight while shaping European politics through feminine networks invisible to male diplomatic establishments. Palace life involved elaborate arrangements for Spanish visitors who met privately with Eugenie to discuss political matters that Napoleon III learned about only through intelligence reports that revealed his wife's separate diplomatic agenda. The soft sound of Spanish being spoken in French palaces during political meetings disguised as social visits, the gentle rustle of letters written in code languages that most French officials couldn't read, the whispered conversations of Spanish agents who found the French empress more sympathetic to their causes than the French emperor. Eugenie's Spanish connections contributed to the diplomatic isolation that made France vulnerable during the Franco-Prussian War that ended the Second Empire. How many imperial downfalls have been accelerated by royal spouses who served their birth countries more loyally than their adopted crowns? Dear listeners, let Aegean waves carry ancient songs as we visit the Bronze Age citadel, where legendary Trojan hospitality became history's most famous betrayal when a guest stole his host's most precious treasure. Prince Paris of Troy violated sacred guest-host relationships by seducing and abducting Helen from King Menelaus of Sparta, creating the personal insult that launched the Trojan War and destroyed both civilizations. Court ceremonies that should have celebrated diplomatic friendship became preparations for decade-long siege warfare, with traditional rituals of hospitality transformed into desperate preparations for a conflict that would consume an entire generation of Greek and Trojan nobility. Palace life shifted from peaceful cultural exchange to military mobilization as King Priam chose family loyalty over international law, protecting his son Paris, despite understanding that this decision would bring destruction to Troy and death to thousands of innocent people. The soft sound of lyres playing in halls that would soon echo with war cries, the gentle splash of wine being poured in cups that would later hold poison, the whispered debates of Trojan elders who wondered whether one woman's beauty justified their civilization's destruction. The fall of Troy proved that some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive and too personal to resolve through diplomacy. How many cities have burned because royal families chose blood loyalty over the moral obligations that sustain civilized society? You're walking through Prague's golden streets as church bells chime the story of how the Holy Roman Empire's most neglectful emperor lost his crown through alcoholism, German resentment, and his inability to govern the multi-ethnic realm he inherited. Wenceslas IV ruled from 1378 to 1419, but spent most of his reign drunk, while German electors systematically transferred imperial power to his rivals, creating a constitutional crisis that permanently weakened imperial authority. Court ceremonies became exercises in managing the emperor's unpredictable behavior, with elaborate protocols designed to hide his drunkenness during state functions, while German nobles quietly organized alternative governments that could function without imperial leadership. Palace life revolved around the emperor's drinking schedule, with important state business conducted during his rare, sober moments, while ministers learned to govern independently when their sovereign was incapacitated by wine and beer. The soft sound of Czech folk songs mixing with German complaints about imperial incompetence, the gentle clink of wine bottles being hidden from diplomatic visitors, the whispered conversations of electors who debated whether to depose an emperor who had effectively deposed himself through chronic intoxication. Wenceslas's loss of the imperial crown in 1400 began the Holy Roman Empire's long decline into irrelevance. What happens to empires when their leaders discover that wine provides better comfort than the responsibilities of governing diverse peoples? Dear listeners, let Scottish mist drift across Edinburgh Castle as we examine one of history's most puzzling royal conspiracies, where the king's dramatic survival story convinced no one and revealed nothing except the paranoia that would define his later reign. James claimed that the Earl of Gowrie and his brother attempted to kidnap or murder him at Gowrie House in 1600. But the details of his escape story were so inconsistent that many suspected the king had orchestrated the entire incident to justify executing potential rivals. Court ceremonies following the alleged conspiracy became theatrical performances designed to reinforce royal authority through manufactured crisis, with elaborate Thanksgiving services celebrating the king's miraculous survival from a plot that may never have existed. Palace life required careful management of the king's increasing paranoia about noble conspiracies, with traditional Scottish court customs modified to provide additional security measures that suggested either genuine danger or royal psychosis. The soft sound of prayers being offered for royal protection from imaginary enemies, the gentle rustle of investigation documents that revealed more about the king's fears than about any actual conspiracy, the whispered debates of Scottish nobles who wondered whether their king was a fortunate survivor or a skillful murderer. The Gowrie mystery remained unsolved because James's version of events satisfied no one while providing no alternative explanation for two brothers' convenient deaths. How many royal conspiracy theories have been created by kings who needed dramatic justification for eliminating inconvenient rivals? You're entering the Colosseum as afternoon shadows lengthen across ancient sand, where Rome's most narcissistic emperor betrayed imperial dignity by fighting as a gladiator, while his empire crumbled under mismanagement and neglect. Commodus ruled from 180 to 192 AD, but spent most of his time training for gladiatorial combat, believing that athletic prowess in the arena demonstrated divine favor and imperial virtue to Roman citizens who were horrified by their emperor's theatrical exhibitionism. Court ceremonies adapted to accommodate the emperor's athletic schedule, with state business conducted around gladiator training sessions, while senators learned to applaud their sovereign's arena performances, despite understanding that such behavior violated every Roman concept of imperial dignity. Palace life revolved around the emperor's physical training regimen, with imperial resources devoted to building private arenas, hiring professional trainers, and organizing rigged gladiatorial contests where Commodus could demonstrate prowess against opponents who had been instructed to lose convincingly. The soft sound of weapons practice echoing through marble halls designed for governance, the gentle applause of terrified audiences watching their emperor perform athletic feats, the whispered prayers of Romans who wondered whether their gods had cursed them with an insane ruler. Commodus's assassination in 192 ended the Antonine dynasty and began the crisis of the 3rd century that nearly destroyed the Roman Empire. What kind of empire can survive when its absolute ruler believes that physical strength in theatrical combat demonstrates fitness for political leadership? Dear listeners, let Pyrenean winds carry medieval songs across mountain passes as we discover how the last great king of Navarre spent 40 years searching for an heir while his kingdom gradually disappeared through inheritance laws that favored larger neighbors. Sancho II ruled from 1194 to 1234, but remained childless despite multiple marriages, creating a succession crisis that would eventually transfer Navarre to French control through female inheritance that Spanish law didn't recognize. Court ceremonies celebrated royal marriages with elaborate fertility rituals, blessing ceremonies, and religious observances designed to encourage conception, while everyone understood that each failed pregnancy brought the kingdom closer to foreign absorption. Palace life involved constant consultations with physicians, astrologers, and religious authorities who offered various explanations for royal infertility, while nobles quietly prepared for the dynastic transition that would end Navarre's independence. The soft chanting of fertility prayers in royal chapels, the gentle rustle of medical treatises being studied by desperate royal physicians, the whispered conversations of courtiers who watched their kingdom's future being determined by biology rather than politics or military strength. Sancho's death without male heirs began Navarre's long absorption into larger European kingdoms, proving that royal bloodlines could be more fragile than the armies that defended them. How many kingdoms have been lost not through military conquest or political revolution, but through the simple biological failure of royal families to produce children? You're walking through Bangkok's temple complexes as monks chant evening prayers, remembering how Siam's greatest military hero destroyed himself by claiming divine status that his Buddhist subjects could never accept. King Taksin reunified Siam after the Burmese invasion of 1767, but gradually developed religious delusions that transformed him from national savior into tyrannical mystic who demanded worship as a living Buddha. Court ceremonies evolved from traditional royal rituals, celebrating Buddhist kingship, into unprecedented religious performances where courtiers were forced to prostrate themselves before a king who claimed to be an incarnation of divine wisdom. Palace life became increasingly surreal as Taksin's religious obsessions consumed state resources through elaborate temple construction projects, while his military campaigns suffered from lack of attention and funding that had been redirected toward religious architecture. The soft sound of traditional Buddhist chants being modified to honor royal divinity, the gentle clink of gold being melted down to create religious artifacts celebrating the king's supposed enlightenment. The whispered concerns of monks who understood that their king's claims violated fundamental Buddhist teachings about enlightenment and reincarnation. Taksin's execution in 1782 ended his brief dynasty, but established the Chakri dynasty that continues to rule Thailand today. What happens to warrior kings who discover that military victory cannot provide the spiritual satisfaction they seek through religious delusion? You're sailing into Naples harbor as Vesuvius glows in the distance, where Europe's most pleasure-loving Bourbon king maintained a dozen official mistresses while his queen plotted revolution and his kingdom descended into political chaos. Ferdinand ruled from 1816 to 1825, while conducting simultaneous affairs with opera singers, aristocratic wives, and peasant girls, creating a scandal that provided ammunition for Republican revolutionaries who portrayed royal excess as justification for overthrowing monarchy entirely. Court ceremonies required elaborate choreography to manage the king's romantic complications, with state dinners where multiple mistresses attended in careful seating arrangements that acknowledged their relative status while preventing violent confrontations between jealous rivals. Palace life revolved around managing Ferdinand's libido while maintaining diplomatic relationships with European powers who were embarrassed by their Neapolitan allies' public debauchery and political incompetence. The soft sound of operatic arias sung by royal mistresses who had been recruited from La Scala. The gentle rustle of silk sheets being changed in royal bedrooms that saw more action than royal council chambers. The whispered gossip of European diplomats who wondered whether Ferdinand's sexual appetite would eventually consume his kingdom along with his dignity. Hey friends, if you love these stories of power, passion, and the human dramas that shaped history, don't forget to subscribe for more whispered tales from royal courts around the world. How many kingdoms have fallen? Not because their kings lacked political skill, but because they couldn't control the appetites that made effective governance impossible. You're walking through the ruins of Herod's palace in Jerusalem as desert winds whisper tales of the king who murdered 3 of his own sons in fits of paranoid rage that shocked even Roman patrons accustomed to imperial violence. Herod executed Alexander, Aristobulus, and Antipater between 7 to 4 BC, convinced that each was plotting against his throne despite little evidence beyond palace gossip and his own psychological deterioration. Court ceremonies became exercises in terror, as remaining family members learned to hide any sign of ambition or intelligence that might trigger their father's murderous suspicions, creating a palace atmosphere where love and loyalty became literally matters of life and death. Palace life involved constant surveillance of royal children by networks of spies and informants who reported every conversation, friendship, and private moment to a king whose paranoia had consumed his capacity for paternal affection. The soft footsteps of servants afraid to make noise that might disturb the king's brooding. the gentle whispers of prayers offered for princes who might not survive another day, the muffled sounds of executions that destroyed the Herodian dynasty from within. Augustus reportedly said it was safer to be Herod's pig than his son. How many royal dynasties have been destroyed not by external enemies, but by fathers who feared their own children more than foreign armies? Dear listeners, let English mist drift across medieval battlefields as we witness how a French princess became England's most hated queen by defending her son's inheritance through civil war that devastated the realm she was supposed to protect. Margaret of Anjou, wife of the mentally unstable Henry VI, effectively ruled England from 1453 to 1471, while fighting the Wars of the Roses to preserve Lancastrian claims against Yorkist challengers who questioned her son's legitimacy. Court ceremonies became political theaters, where Margaret's supporters proclaimed Prince Edward's divine right, while enemies whispered that the boy's true father was Edmund Beaufort rather than the king, making the entire war a struggle over disputed paternity. Palace life required constant military preparedness as Margaret transformed royal residences into military headquarters, with traditional courtly entertainments replaced by strategic planning sessions and diplomatic negotiations with French allies. The soft sound of armor being fitted in palace chambers designed for music and poetry, the gentle rustle of battle plans being drawn on maps that once showed peaceful territories, the whispered debates about whether defending a possibly illegitimate heir justified destroying England through civil war. Margaret's final defeat at Tewkesbury in 1471 ended Lancastrian hopes, but established her reputation as medieval England's most formidable warrior queen. What kind of mother wages 20-year wars to defend a son whose paternity remains forever questionable? You're entering the marble halls of ancient Rome as evening shadows lengthen across Forum stones, where history's most notorious emperor allegedly conducted an incestuous relationship with his favorite sister that scandalized even jaded Roman aristocrats. Caligula's obsession with Drusilla went far beyond normal sibling affection, including her in religious ceremonies as his divine consort, and reportedly sharing his bed in arrangements that violated Roman law, custom, and religious tradition. Court protocols adapted to accommodate their unusual relationship through elaborate justifications based on Egyptian royal customs and divine precedent, creating new ceremonies that honored Drusilla as both sister and quasi-imperial partner. Palace life revolved around the imperial siblings' shared interests, with state business conducted in arrangements that allowed Drusilla unprecedented influence over Roman policy, while courtiers learned to treat her as effectively co-emperor despite her lack of official title. The soft sound of shocked whispers echoing through marble corridors, the gentle rustle of togas worn by senators who couldn't believe what they were witnessing, the muffled conversations of Roman citizens who wondered whether their gods would punish such fundamental violations of natural law. Drusilla's death in 38 AD reportedly drove Caligula to complete madness, leading to his assassination and the end of his brief, shocking reign. What happens to empires when their absolute rulers decide that divine authority includes the right to violate humanity's most basic taboos? Dear listeners, let Spanish guitars whisper across Castilian plains as we discover how history's most ruthless medieval king found his only moments of tenderness with a woman whose love temporarily civilized his savage nature. Pedro the Cruel secretly married Maria de Padilla around 1353, creating a relationship that provided his only respite from the violence and political machinations that defined his reign from 1350 to 1369. Court ceremonies had to accommodate Pedro's double life, with official functions honoring his political marriage to Blanche of Bourbon, while private celebrations acknowledged Maria as his true wife and the mother of his beloved children. Palace life was divided between public brutality and private domesticity, with the same king who ordered mass executions becoming gentle and affectionate in Maria's presence, creating a psychological split that confused even his closest advisors. The soft sound of lullabies sung in chambers where the king's children played safely, while their father planned military campaigns that would devastate Castile. The gentle rustle of love letters written by hands that signed death warrants, the whispered amazement of courtiers who watched their cruel sovereign transform into a devoted husband and father. Maria's death in 1361 removed Pedro's last connection to humanity, leading to the final 8 years of unrestrained violence that ended with his assassination. How many tyrants might have been saved from their worst impulses if love had lasted longer than the political necessities that destroyed it? You're walking through Madrid's Puerta del Sol as revolutionary songs echo through cobblestone streets, witnessing how an honest Italian prince discovered that borrowed crowns come with obligations that no foreign monarch can fulfill. Amadeo of Savoy ruled Spain from 1870 to 1873, but faced constant opposition from Catholics who resented his Italian origins, Republicans who opposed monarchy entirely, and Carlists who supported alternative dynastic claims. Court ceremonies became surreal performances where the king honored Spanish traditions he didn't understand, while Spanish nobles attended functions for a sovereign they didn't want, creating elaborate charades that satisfied no one and convinced no one of the monarchy's legitimacy. Palace life required constant translation between Italian expectations and Spanish realities, with Amadeo's honest attempts at constitutional monarchy repeatedly undermined by Spanish political factions that preferred chaos to foreign rule. The soft sound of Italian being spoken in Spanish palaces by courtiers who couldn't communicate effectively with their adopted subjects, the gentle rustle of constitutional documents written in languages that political opponents refused to acknowledge, the whispered conversations of Spanish politicians who used their foreign king as a scapegoat for problems that predated his arrival. Amadeo's abdication in 1873 began Spain's first republic, and proved that democratic kingdoms require native monarchs who understand their subjects' cultural expectations. What happens when well-meaning foreign princes discover that constitutional monarchy works only when both crown and constitution belong to the same political tradition? Dear listeners, let African drums beat softly as we carefully approach one of modern history's most disturbing royal experiments, where a military dictator proclaimed himself emperor and allegedly practiced cannibalism while bankrupting his nation through imperial extravagance. Jean Bedel Bokassa crowned himself emperor in 1977, spending 1/3 of his nation's annual budget on coronation ceremonies modeled on Napoleon's, while his subjects faced starvation and systematic human rights violations. Court life combined traditional African customs with French imperial protocol and Bokassa's personal psychological disorders, creating ceremonies that honored ancestral spirits while celebrating European-style monarchy in a nation that lacked resources for either tradition. Palace protocols adapted to accommodate the emperor's alleged cannibalistic practices, with state dinners that may have included human flesh served to terrified guests who understood that refusing imperial hospitality could be literally fatal. The soft sound of traditional African music mixed with European ceremonial fanfares, the gentle clink of golden tableware that cost more than hospitals while children died from preventable diseases, the whispered terror of subjects who lived under a ruler whose cruelty exceeded even colonial-era brutality. Bokassa's overthrow in 1979 ended Central Africa's brief experiment with indigenous monarchy, but left psychological scars that lasted for generations. How many post-colonial nations have been betrayed by leaders who confused liberation from foreign rule with the license to become worse than the colonizers they replaced? You're walking across Saharan dunes as desert winds carry the story of Libya's only king, whose pious rule was destroyed by the very modernization programs that were supposed to strengthen his traditional authority. King Idris ruled from 1951 to 1969 by balancing tribal loyalties with Islamic scholarship. But oil wealth attracted military officers who viewed traditional monarchy as an obstacle to Arab nationalist revolution. Court ceremonies blended ancient Bedouin customs with modern diplomatic requirements, creating protocols that honored tribal elders while acknowledging oil company representatives and international diplomats whose presence gradually undermined traditional authority structures. Palace life became increasingly isolated as Idris relied on religious legitimacy, while younger Libyans embraced secular ideologies that portrayed monarchy as an outdated institution incompatible with modern Arab nationalism and social justice. The soft chanting of Quranic verses in palaces surrounded by modern military equipment purchased with oil revenues, the gentle rustle of traditional robes worn to meetings with Western businessmen, the whispered concerns of tribal leaders who watched their young men adopt revolutionary ideas that threatened centuries of customary governance. Gaddafi's bloodless coup in 1969 ended Libyan monarchy while beginning 42 years of dictatorship that proved far worse than the traditional kingdom it replaced. What happens to traditional kings when oil wealth transforms their societies faster than royal institutions can adapt to change? You're standing in Rome's Piazza Venezia as church bells ring across the Eternal City, witnessing how Italy's last king lost his crown not through revolution or foreign conquest, but through democratic vote that rejected monarchy after fascist collaboration. Umberto II ruled for only 34 days in 1946 before a referendum chose Republican government over monarchical restoration, making him Europe's briefest reigning king and monarchy's most democratically defeated sovereign. Court ceremonies during his brief reign attempted to restore traditional royal dignity while acknowledging the Republic sentiment that made his position untenable, creating formal protocols for a crown that everyone understood would soon disappear. Palace life involved preparing for permanent exile while maintaining royal appearances, with traditional monarchical duties performed by a king who knew that Italian voters would soon render his entire dynasty politically extinct. The soft sound of royal hymns being sung for the last time in Italian palaces, the gentle rustle of constitutional documents being prepared for a monarchy that democratic process would soon eliminate, the whispered conversations of Italian nobles who realized that their aristocratic world was ending not through violence but through ballot boxes. Umberto's exile to Portugal proved that 20th century monarchy could survive only with popular consent that Italian fascism had permanently destroyed. How many kings have discovered that democracy's greatest power lies not in its ability to create governments, but in its capacity to peacefully eliminate them? Dear listeners, let Balkan winds whisper across Sophia's golden domes as we follow the story of Europe's youngest king, who was forced into exile at age 9 and spent 55 years waiting to return to a homeland that had been transformed beyond recognition. Simeon II ruled briefly from 1943 to 1946 under a regency before communist forces eliminated the Bulgarian monarchy and sent the royal family into permanent exile that lasted until 1996. Court life during his brief reign involved elaborate attempts to maintain royal dignity while Soviet armies occupied the country and communist politicians systematically dismantled monarchical institutions through legal procedures that had predetermined outcomes. Palace ceremonies continued with traditional protocols, while everyone understood that these would be the last royal functions in Bulgarian history, creating poignant farewell performances for a monarchy that had ruled Bulgaria since 1887. The soft sound of Bulgarian folk songs sung in royal chambers for the final time. The gentle rustle of childhood toys being packed by a boy king who would not see his homeland again until he was an elderly man. The whispered prayers of loyal servants who knew they were witnessing the end of an era that would not return. Simeon's eventual return as elected prime minister from 2001 to 2005 proved that royal blood could find new forms of service even when crowns had been permanently discarded. What kind of strength does it take for child kings to survive 55 years of exile and return not as monarchs, but as democratic servants of the people who once rejected them? You're watching the sunset over Atlas Mountains as Berber songs drift across ancient caravan routes, where Morocco's longest reigning king expanded his territory through the Green March, while ruling with an iron fist that brooked no opposition to royal authority. Hassan II ruled from 1961 to 1999, leading 350,000 Moroccan civilians into Western Sahara in 1975 to claim territory that Spain was abandoning, creating a conflict that continues today and defined his reign's international legacy. Court ceremonies celebrated Moroccan territorial expansion while carefully avoiding discussion of human rights violations and political repression that characterized domestic governance throughout Hassan's 38-year reign. Palace life combined traditional Moroccan customs with modern security apparatus, as the king maintained absolute authority through intelligence services that monitored every aspect of Moroccan society while presenting Morocco as a stable Western ally. The soft sound of traditional Andalusian music played in palaces surrounded by modern surveillance equipment. The gentle rustle of diplomatic correspondence that praised Morocco's stability while ignoring systematic human rights violations. The whispered fears of Moroccan citizens who learned never to criticize royal policies or question government decisions. Hassan's death in 1999 began Morocco's gradual liberalization under his son Mohammed VI. But the Western Sahara conflict remains unresolved. How many kings have built their legacies on territorial expansion abroad while maintaining domestic stability through systematic repression that history remembers alongside their diplomatic achievements? You're standing on the misty shores of the Thames as dawn breaks over medieval London, where Denmark's greatest king discovered that conquering England meant abandoning his Viking heritage to become the Christian ruler his new subjects demanded. Canute ruled England from 1016 to 1035, but maintaining power required adopting Anglo-Saxon customs, Christian piety, and English administrative practices that gradually transformed him from Norse warrior into English monarch. Court ceremonies blended Scandinavian traditions with Christian liturgy, creating hybrid rituals that honored both cultures, while slowly favoring English customs. The soft sound of Viking war songs being replaced by Christian hymns, the gentle rustle of Norse clothing giving way to English royal robes, the whispered conversations of Danish courtiers who watched their king become more English than Viking. How many conquerors have discovered that holding foreign crowns requires becoming the very people they once sought to dominate? Dear listeners, let Atlantic waves crash against Portuguese cliffs as we witness how the founder of Portugal established his kingdom by waging war against his own mother, who opposed his independence from Leon. Afonso Henriques fought the Battle of São Mamede in 1128 against forces led by his mother Teresa, who preferred vassalage to Leon over the dangerous independence her son demanded for the county of Portugal. Court ceremonies after his victory required delicate protocols for honoring a defeated mother while establishing royal authority that she had opposed, creating awkward family dynamics that mixed filial respect with political necessity. The soft sound of victory celebrations muted by awareness that triumph had come through defeating beloved family members, the gentle rustle of new royal banners replacing familiar county standards. What kind of kingdom can be built on foundations that require sons to defeat their mothers in battle? You're climbing the ancient fortress of Magdala as Ethiopian highland winds carry tales of how Africa's most ambitious emperor destroyed himself through a diplomatic crisis that began with unanswered letters and ended with British invasion. Tewodros II ruled from 1855 to 1868, but his imprisonment of British diplomats in 1867 triggered the Anglo-Ethiopian War that cost him his throne and his life when he chose suicide over capture. Court ceremonies celebrated Ethiopian independence and traditional Orthodox Christianity, while increasingly desperate diplomatic maneuvers failed to secure European recognition. The soft chanting of Orthodox liturgies echoing through mountain fortresses, the gentle rustle of diplomatic correspondence that European governments ignored, the whispered prayers of Ethiopian nobles who watched their emperor's isolation drive him toward destructive confrontations. How many African kings have been destroyed by their attempts to join the European diplomatic system that was designed to exclude them? Dear listeners, let temple bells chime across Bangkok as we discover how Thailand's last absolute monarch voluntarily surrendered unlimited royal power only to discover that constitutional monarchy offered him less authority than comfortable exile. Prajadipok ruled from 1925 to 1935, but accepted constitutional limits on royal authority in 1932, rather than fight the military coup that ended centuries of absolute Siamese monarchy. Court ceremonies adapted to constitutional requirements that reduced traditional royal rituals to symbolic performances, while real power shifted to military leaders and civilian politicians. The soft sound of constitutional documents being read in royal chambers designed for absolute monarchy, the gentle rustle of traditional royal robes worn during ceremonies that no longer carried political meaning. What happens when absolute monarchs discover that constitutional democracy transforms kings from rulers into ceremonial figures? You're walking through the rolling hills of Swaziland as traditional Swazi songs drift across rural landscapes where Africa's longest reigning monarch maintained traditional polygamy on a scale that created a royal family larger than most villages. Sobhuza Iku ruled from 1921 to 1982 with over 70 wives and 210 children, creating succession complications that required traditional Swazi customs to manage a royal household that had grown beyond historical precedent. Court ceremonies celebrating new marriages became regular features of Swazi national life, with traditional rituals expanded to accommodate the logistical challenges of managing dozens of simultaneous royal wives and hundreds of royal children. The soft sound of traditional drums celebrating another royal wedding, the gentle laughter of hundreds of royal children playing in palace compounds. How many traditional monarchies have been preserved through customs that became impossible to sustain when applied too successfully? You're walking through Baghdad's ancient streets as desert winds whisper stories of how an Arabian prince became king of a country he had never seen, ruling subjects who spoke a different language and followed different customs than his Bedouin heritage. Faisal ruled Iraq from 1921 to 1933 as a British-sponsored monarch in a kingdom created by colonial administrators who ignored ethnic, religious, and cultural divisions that made unified Iraqi identity nearly impossible. Court ceremonies attempted to blend Hashemite Arab traditions with Iraqi customs while acknowledging British oversight that limited royal authority and ensured that real power remained with colonial administrators. The soft sound of Arabic prayers mixing with English administrative discussions. The gentle rustle of traditional Arab robes worn to meetings with British officials in Western dress. What happens when colonial powers create kingdoms by appointing foreign princes to rule artificially constructed nations? Dear listeners, let Madagascar's ocean winds carry the scent of ylang ylang flowers as we witness how the Indian Ocean's largest island lost its independence through a king's naive belief that European civilization could coexist with traditional Malagasy culture. Radama II ruled from 1861 to 1863, but reversed his mother's isolationist policies by welcoming French missionaries, traders, and advisors who gradually gained control over Madagascar's government and economy. Court ceremonies incorporated European elements including Christian services, Western dress codes, and diplomatic protocols that displaced traditional Malagasy customs while failing to provide the international recognition that the king expected. The soft sound of Christian hymns replacing traditional Malagasy ancestor worship. The gentle rustle of European clothing worn by Malagasy nobles who felt uncomfortable in foreign dress. How many traditional African kingdoms have been lost through kings who believed that European modernization offered partnership rather than preparation for colonial conquest? You're standing in the ruins of medieval Hungarian castles as Carpathian winds whisper the final chapter of Hungary's founding dynasty, where the last Arpad king died mysteriously in 1301, ending 3 centuries of Magyar rule and beginning decades of foreign domination. Wenceslaus III ruled briefly as king of Hungary and Poland, but was assassinated at age 20, possibly by rivals who opposed Bohemian influence over Hungarian politics, or by Hungarian nobles who preferred foreign alternatives to continued Premyslid rule. Court ceremonies during his brief reign attempted to maintain Hungarian royal traditions, while acknowledging Bohemian influences that many Hungarian nobles viewed as foreign interference. The soft sound of Hungarian folk songs mixed with Czech court music, the gentle rustle of traditional Hungarian dress competing with Bohemian fashion. How many ancient dynasties have ended not through glorious defeat or natural extinction, but through the simple murder of young kings whose potential remained forever unknown? You're sailing through the Aegean Sea as Greek fishermen's songs drift across ancient waters, where a king discovered that family loyalty and national interest could become mutually exclusive during global war that demanded absolute commitment from every European monarch. Constantine. I ruled during World War I, but faced impossible choices between his German wife's family connections and Greek popular sentiment that favored the Allied cause against the Central Powers. Court ceremonies became exercises in diplomatic neutrality that satisfied no one, with royal functions that honored both German and Allied representatives while Greeks increasingly demanded their king choose sides. The soft sound of German lullabies sung in Greek palaces while outside crowds demonstrated for Allied victory. The gentle rustle of diplomatic correspondence written in languages that revealed uncomfortable family connections. What happens to kings when global warfare makes their personal family connections into acts of potential treason against their own subjects? Dear listeners, as our journey through a century of royal betrayals draws to a close, let us visit the mountain kingdom of Lesotho, where Africa's last absolute monarch learned that constitutional democracy requires kings to accept limitations that traditional authority had never acknowledged. Letsi III has ruled since 1996, but faced constitutional crises when his attempts to influence elections violated democratic norms that his subjects had embraced more completely than their traditional monarch expected. Court ceremonies blend ancient Basotho customs with modern constitutional requirements, creating protocols that honor ancestral traditions while acknowledging democratic institutions that limit royal authority. The soft sound of traditional Basotho praise songs, mixing with modern election campaigns. The gentle rustle of traditional blankets worn to meetings with democratically elected prime ministers. What new stories will tomorrow's historians tell about the royal family still making their quiet scandals in our modern world?